Like most people, I lived for a long time with my mother and father. My father liked to watch the wrestling. My mother liked to wrestle. It didn't matter what. She was in the white corner, and that was that. She had never heard of mixed feelings. There were friends, and there were enemies. Enemies were the devil, in his many forms, next door, sex, in its many forms, slugs. Friends were God, our dog, Auntie Madge, the novels of Charlotte Bronte, slug pellets, and me, at first. I had been brought in to join her in a tag match against the rest of the world. She had a mysterious attitude towards the begetting of children. It wasn't that she couldn't do it, more that she didn't want to do it. She was very bitter about the Virgin Mary getting there first. So she did the next best thing and arranged for a foundling. That was me. I cannot recall a time when I didn't know that I was special. We had no wise men, because she didn't believe there were any wise men. But we had sheep. One of my earliest memories is me sitting on a sheep at Easter while she told me the story of the sacrificial lamb. We had it on Sundays with potato. Sunday was the Lord's Day, the most vigorous day of the whole week. We had a radiogram at home with an imposing mahogany front and a fat Bakelite knob to twiddle for the stations. Usually we listened to the light programme, but on Sundays always the World Service, so that my mother could record the progress of our missionaries. Our missionary map was very fine. My mother got up early on Sundays and allowed no one into the parlour until 10 o'clock. It was her place of prayer and meditation. She always prayed standing up because of her knees, just as Bonaparte always gave orders from his horse because of his size. I do think that the relationship my mother enjoyed with God had a lot to do with positioning. She was Old Testament through and through. She always prayed in exactly the same way. First of all, she thanked God that she had lived to see another day, and then she thanked God for sparing the world another day. Then she spoke of her enemies, which was the nearest thing she had to a catechism. As soon as "Vengeance is mine, saith the Lord" boomed through the wall into the kitchen, I put the kettle on. The time it took to boil the water and brew the tea was just about the length of her final item, the sick list. She was very regular. I put the milk in she came, and taking a great gulp of tea said one of three things. "The Lord is good," steely-eyed into the backyard. "What sort of tea is this?" steely-eyed at me. "Who was the oldest man in the Bible?" Number 3, of course, had a number of variations, but it was always a Bible quiz question. We had a lot of Bible quizzes at church, and my mother liked me to win. If I knew the answer, she asked me another. If I didn't, she got cross. But luckily not for long, because we had to listen to the World Service. Somehow we got through those mornings, and in the afternoon she and I took the dog for a walk, while my father cleaned all the shoes. "You can tell someone by the shoes," my mother said. "Look at next door." "Drink," said my mother grimly as we stepped out past their house. My mother and I walked on towards the hill that stood at the top of our street. We lived in a town stolen from the valleys, a huddled place full of chimneys and little shops and back-to-back houses with no gardens. When you climb to the top of the hill and look down, you can see everything. Just like Jesus on the pinnacle, except that it's not very tempting. Over to the right was the viaduct, and behind the viaduct Ellison's tenement, where we had the fair once a year. The gypsies made a mess and stayed up all night, and my mother called them fornicators. But on the whole, we got on very well. An old woman got hold of my hand. I thought she was going to bite me. She looked at my palm and laughed a bit. "You will never marry," she said. "Not you. And you will never be still." I hadn't thought about getting married anyway. There were 2 women I knew who didn't have husbands at all. They were old, though, as old as my mother. They ran the paper shop, and sometimes on a Wednesday they gave me a banana bar with my comic. I liked them a lot, and talked about them a lot to my mother. Then she cancelled my comic and told me to collect it from another shop, further away. A couple of weeks later, I heard her telling Mrs. White about it. She said they dealt in unnatural passions. I thought she meant they put chemicals in their sweets. My mother and I climbed and climbed until the town fell away and we reached the memorial stone at the very top. We sat on the stone's base and she thanked the Lord that we had managed the ascent. Then she extemporised on the nature of the world, the folly of its peoples and the wrath of God inevitable. After that, she told me a story about a brave person who had despised the fruits of the flesh and worked for the Lord instead. Now and again, my mother liked to tell me her own conversion story. It was very romantic. I sometimes think that if Mills and Boon were at all revivalist in their policy, my mother would be a star. One night, by mistake, she had walked into Pastor Spratt's Glory Crusade. It was in a tent on some spare land, and every evening Pastor Spratt spoke of the fate of the damned and performed healing miracles. He was very impressive. My mother said he looked like Errol Flynn, but holy. A lot of women found the Lord that week, and it was then that my mother discovered her abiding interest in missionary work. She walked out one night and thought of her life, and thought of what was possible. She thought of the things she couldn't be. She liked to speak French and to play the piano. But what do these things mean? My mother, out walking that night, dreamed a dream and sustained it in daylight. She would get a child, train it, build it, dedicate it to the Lord. A missionary child, a servant of God, a blessing. And so it was that on a particular day, some time later, she followed a star until it came to settle above an orphanage, and in that place was a crib, and in that crib a child with too much hair. She said, "This child is mine from the Lord." She took the child away, and for 7 days and 7 nights the child cried out, for fear and not knowing. The mother sang to the child and stabbed the demons. She understood how jealous the spirit is of flesh. We stood on the hill, and my mother said, "This world is full of sin." We stood on the hill, and my mother said, "You can change the world." That night at church, we had a visiting speaker, Pastor Finch from Stockport. He was an expert in demons, and delivered a terrifying sermon on how easy it was to become demon-possessed. We were all very uneasy afterwards. Mrs. White said that she thought her next-door neighbours were probably possessed. They had all the signs. Pastor Finch said that the possessed are given to uncontrollable rages, sudden bursts of wild laughter, and are always very cunning. The devil himself, he reminded us, can come as an angel of light. After the service, we were having a banquet. My mother had made 20 trifles and her usual mound of cheese and onion sandwiches. "You can always tell a good woman by her sandwiches," declared Pastor Finch. My mother blushed. Then he turned to me and said, "How old are you, little girl?" "7, I replied. "Ah, 7, he muttered. "How blessed! The 7 days of creation, the 7-branch candlestick, the 7 seals." 7 seals? I had not yet reached Revelation in my directed reading, and I thought he meant some Old Testament amphibians I'd overlooked. I spent weeks trying to find them, in case they came up as a quiz question. "Yes," he went on, "how blessed." Then his brow clouded. "But how cursed." This little Lily could herself be a house of demons. "Hey, steady on, boy," said Mrs. Finch anxiously. "Don't interrupt me, Grace," he said firmly. "I mean this by way of example only. God has given me an opportunity, and what God has given we must not presume to waste." It had been known for the most holy men to be suddenly filled with evil. And how much more a woman? And how much more a child? Parents, watch your children for the signs. Husbands, watch your wives. Blessed be the name of the Lord. "You shouldn't tax yourself so, Roy," said Mrs. Finch. "Have some trifle. It's got sherry in it." "Time to go home," said my mother. "I think you've had enough excitement for one day." It's odd the things other people think are exciting. We set off. My mother, Alice, and May. Auntie Alice, Auntie May to you. We went past the shop that sold flea collars and poisons. Arkwright's for Vermin it was called. I'd been inside it once, when we had a run of cockroaches. Mrs. Arkwright was there cashing up. She caught sight of May as we went past and shouted at her to come in. My mother wasn't very pleased, but muttering something about Jesus associating with tax collectors and sinners pushed me inside in front of them all. "Where have you been, May?" asked Mrs. Arkwright, wiping her hand on a dishcloth. "Not seen hide of you in a month." "I've been in Blackpool." "Oh, come into some money, have you?" "It were at bingo, I'll say, 3 times." "No." Mrs. Arkwright was both admiring and bad-tempered. The conversation continued like this for some time. Mrs. Arkwright complaining that business was poor, that she'd have to close the shop, that there was no money in Vermin any more. "Remember that heat wave 2 years ago? Oh, I did some trade then. Cockroaches, hardbacks, rats, you name it, I poisoned it. No, it's not the same any more." Eventually we got home. "Good night, May. Good night, Alice. God bless." My father had already gone to bed because he worked early shifts. My mother wouldn't be going to bed for hours. As long as I've known them, my mother has gone to bed at 4, and my father has got up at 5. That was nice in a way, because it meant I could come down in the middle of the night and not be lonely. Quite often we'd have bacon and eggs, and she'd read me a bit of the Bible. It was in this way that I began my education. She taught me to read from the book of Deuteronomy, and she told me all about the lives of the saints, and how they were really wicked, and given to nameless desires, not fit for worship. This was yet another heresy of the Catholic Church, and I was not to be misled by the smooth tongues of priests. But I never see any priests. A girl's motto is be prepared. I learnt that it rains when clouds collide with a high building, like a steeple or a cathedral. The impact punctures them, and everybody underneath gets wet. This was why, in the old days, when the only tall buildings were holy, people used to say that cleanliness is next to godliness. The more godly your town, the more high buildings you'd have, and the more rain you'd get. I discovered that everything in the natural world was a symbol of the great struggle between good and evil. "Consider the mamba," said my mother. "Over short distances, the mamba can outrun a horse." I asked my mother to teach me French, but her face clouded over, and she said she couldn't. "Why not?" "It was nearly my downfall." "What do you mean?" I persisted. But she only shook her head and muttered something about me being too young. That I'd find out all too soon, and that it was nasty. "One day," she said finally, "I'll tell you about Pierre." Then she switched on the radio and ignored me. "Why don't I go to school?" I asked her. I was curious about school, because my mother always called it a breeding ground. I didn't know what she meant, but I knew it was a bad thing. Like unnatural passions. "They'll lead you astray," was the only answer I got. Then, one morning, as we'd got up early to listen to Ivan pop off from behind the iron curtain, a fat brown envelope plopped through the letterbox. My mother thought it was a letter of thanks from those who had attended our healing of the sick crusade in the town hall. She ripped it open, then her face fell. "What is it?" I asked her. "It's about you." "What about me?" "I have to send you to school." I whizzed into the toilet and sat on my hands. The breeding ground, at last! The next morning was a hive of activity. My mother dragged me out of bed shouting that it was 7:30, and that she had no sleep at all, and that my dad had gone to work without his dinner. She poured a scalding kettle of water into the sink. "Why didn't you go to bed?" I asked her. "No point if I had to get up with you 3 hours later." She shot a jet of cold water into the hot. "Well, you could have had an early night," I suggested, struggling with my pyjama top. An old woman had made it for me and made the neck hole the same size as the armholes, so I always got sore ears. Once I went deaf for 3 months with my adenoids. No one noticed that either. I was lying in bed one night, thinking about the glory of the Lord, when it struck me that life had got very quiet. I'd been to church as usual, sung as loudly as ever, but it seemed for some time that I was the only one making a noise. I had assumed myself to be in a state of rapture, not uncommon in our church, and later I discovered that my mother had assumed the same. When May had asked her why I wasn't answering anybody, my mother had said, "It's the Lord." So, unknown to me, word spread about our church that I was in a state of rapture, and no one should speak to me. "Why do you think it happened?" Mrs. White wanted to know. "Oh, it's not surprising. She's 7, you know." May paused for effect. "It's a holy number. Strange things happen in 7s. Look at Elsie Norris." Elsie Norris, testifying Elsie as she was called, was a great encouragement to our church. She always prayed for 2 hours a day, once in the morning at 7 a.m. and once in the evening at 7 p.m. Her hobby was numerology, and she never read the word without first casting a dice to guide her. 1 dice for the chapter and 1 for the verse was her motto. I liked her a lot, because she had interesting things in her house. She had an organ that you had to pedal if you wanted to make a noise. Whenever I went there, she played Lead Kindly Light, her doing the keys and me doing the pedals because she had asthma. She collected foreign coins and kept them in a glass case that smelled of linseed oil. She said it reminded her of her late husband, who used to play cricket for Lancashire. "Hard Hand Stan, they called him," she said every time I went to see her. One Sunday, the pastor told everyone how full of the Spirit I was. He talked about me for 20 minutes, and I didn't hear a word. Just sat there reading my Bible and thinking what a long book it was. Of course, this seeming modesty made them all the more convinced. But on the night I realised I couldn't hear anything, I went downstairs and wrote on a piece of paper, "Mother, the world is very quiet." My mother nodded and carried on with her book. She'd got it in the post that morning from Pastor Spratt. It was a description of missionary life, called "Other Continents Know Him Too." I couldn't attract her attention, so I took an orange and went back to bed. I had to find out for myself. Someone had given me a recorder and tune book for my birthday, so I propped myself up against the pillows and piped out a couple of verses of Auld Lang Syne. I could see my fingers moving, but there was no sound. The next day, I leapt out of bed determined to explain to my mother what was wrong. But there was no one in the house. My breakfast had been left on the kitchenette with a short note. Dear Jeanette, we have gone to the hospital to pray for Auntie Betty. Her leg is very loose. Love, Mother. So I spent the day as well as I could, and finally decided to go for a walk. That walk was my salvation. I met Miss Dewsbury, who played the oboe and conducted the sisterhood choir. She was very clever. But she's not holy, Mrs. White had once said. Miss Dewsbury must have said hello to me, and I must have ignored her. She stood in front of me, opening and shutting her mouth, which was very large on account of the oboe, and pulling her eyebrows into the middle of her head. I took hold of her hand and led her into the post office. Then I picked up one of the pens and wrote on the back of a child allowance form, Dear Miss Dewsbury, I can't hear a thing. She looked at me in horror, and taking the pen herself, wrote, What is your mother doing about it? Why aren't you in bed? By now there was no room left on the child allowance form, so I had to use who to contact in the event of an emergency. Dear Miss Dewsbury, my mother doesn't know. She's at the hospital with Auntie Betty. I was in bed last night. Miss Dewsbury just stared and stared. She stared for so long I began to think about going home. Then she snatched my hand and whisked me off to the hospital. When we got there, my mother and some others had gathered around Auntie Betty's bed, singing choruses. My mother saw us, looked a bit surprised, but didn't get up. Finally, Miss Dewsbury yelled so loud even I heard it, This child's not full of the spirit! She's deaf! The doctor and Miss Dewsbury whisked me away to a cold room full of equipment and made me lie down. The doctor kept tapping me in different places and shaking his head. And it was all absolutely silent. Then my mother arrived and seemed to understand what was going on. She signed a form and wrote me another note. Dear Jeanette, there's nothing wrong, you're just a bit deaf. Why didn't you tell me? I'm going home to get your pyjamas. On the morning of my operation, the nurses were smiling and rearranging the bed again and piling the oranges in a symmetrical tower. 2 hairy arms lifted me up and strapped me onto a cold trolley. The casters squeaked and the man who pushed me went too fast. Corridors, double doors, and 2 pairs of eyes peeping over the top of a tight white mask. A nurse held my hand while someone fitted a muzzle over my nose and mouth. I breathed in and saw a great line of water skiers falling off and not coming back up. Then I didn't see anything at all. Jelly, Jeanette? I knew it. I'd died, and the angels were giving me jelly. I opened my eyes, expecting to see a pair of wings. Come on, eat up, the voice encouraged. Are you an angel? I asked hopefully. Not quite, I'm a doctor. But she's an angel, aren't you, nurse? The angel blushed. I can hear, I said, to no one in particular. Eat your jelly, said the nurse. I might have languished alone for the rest of the week if Elsie hadn't found out where I was and started visiting me. My mother couldn't come till the weekend. I knew that because she was waiting in for the plumber to check her fittings. Elsie came every day and told me jokes and made me smile, and stories to make me feel better. She said stories helped you to understand the world. When I felt better, she promised to show me the basics I needed to help her with her numerology. A thrill of excitement ran through me, because I knew my mother disapproved. She said it was too close to madness. Never mind that, said Elsie. It works. My mother came to see me quite a lot in the end. But it was the busy season at church. They were planning the Christmas campaign. When she couldn't come herself, she sent my father, usually with a letter and a couple of oranges. The only fruit, she always said. Fruit salad, fruit pie, fruit for fools, fruited punch, demon fruit, passion fruit, rotten fruit, fruit on Sunday. Elsie, Norris and me ate an orange every day, half each. Elsie had no teeth, so she sucked and chomped. I dropped my pieces like oysters far back into the throat. People used to watch us, but we didn't mind. When I finally left the hospital, my hearing had been restored, and my confidence recovered, thanks to her. I had to go and stay with Elsie for a couple of days, until my mother got back from Wigan, where she was auditing the Society for the Lost. "I found a new piece of music," she said on the bus. "It's got an interlude for 7 elephants in it." "What's it called?" "The Battle of Abyssinia." When we got home, she came over all mysterious and told me to wait in the parlour. I could hear her rustling and muttering. Then I heard something squeaking. At last she pushed open the door, wheezing loudly. "God forgive me," she panted, "but it's a bugger." And she plonked a large box on the table. "What is it?" "Never mind that. Open it." I pulled off the wrapper. It was a domed wooden box with 3 white mice inside. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, in the fiery furnace. She stretched her gums at me into a smile. "Look, I painted the flames myself." The back of the box was a wash of angry orange paint shaped into tongues of flame. "It could even be Pentecost," I suggested. "Oh yes, it's very versatile," she agreed. The mice took no notice. "And see, I made these too." She shuffled in her bag and pulled out 2 plywood figures. They were both painted very bright, but it was obvious that one was celestial, from the wings. She looked at me, triumphant. "Nebuchadnezzar and the angel of the Lord." The angel had little slits in the base that helped him to fit on top of the dome without disturbing the mice. "It's beautiful," I said. "I know," she nodded, dropping a bit of cheese past the angel. "Some folks say I'm a fool, but there's more to this world than meets the eye." I waited quietly. "There's this world," she banged the wall graphically. "And there's this world," she thumped her chest. "If you want to make sense of either, you have to take notice of both." "I don't understand," I sighed, thinking what to ask next to make it clearer. But she had fallen asleep with her mouth open, and besides, there were the mice to feed. "Perhaps I'll find out when I get to school," was my only consolation, as the hours ticked past and Elsie didn't wake up. Even when she did wake up, she seemed to have forgotten all about her explanation of the universe, and wanted to build a tunnel for the mice. I didn't find many explanations at school, though, either. It only got more and more complex. After 3 terms, I was beginning to despair. I'd learnt country dancing and the rudiments of needlework, but not a great deal more. And so I squatted down in the shoe bags and got depressed. The shoe bag room was dark and smelly. It was always smelly, even at the beginning of term. "You can't get rid of feet," I heard the caretaker say sourly. The cleaning lady shook her head. She'd got rid of more smells than she'd eaten hot dinners. She had even worked in a zoo once, and you know how them animals stink. But the feet had beaten her. "This stuff'll take the seal off floors," she said, waving a red tin, "but it don't shift feet." I comforted myself with the thought of the summer camp our church went on each year. This time we were going far away, to Devon. My mother was very excited, because Pastor Spratt had promised to call in on one of his rare visits to England. He was to take the first Sunday service in the gospel tent just outside Columpton. At the moment, Pastor Spratt was touring his exhibition in Europe. He was fast becoming one of the most famous and successful missionaries that our group of churches had ever sent out. Apart from Pastor Spratt, we had planned a careful campaign for the farming folk of Devon. My mother was in charge of the camp stores and had already started buying in huge tins of beans and frankfurter sausages. "An army marches on its stomach," she told me. We were hoping to make enough converts to start a new church in Exeter. "I remember when we built the gospel hall here," said my mother wistfully. "All of us pulling together. And we only used born-again workmen." Of course, your father was a card player in those days. Eventually, they had got a grant from head office to finish the roof and pay for a flag to fly from the top. It was a proud day when they hoisted the flag, with "Seek ye the Lord" embroidered in red letters. All the churches had flags, made by disabled missionaries. It was a way of helping out their pensions and giving them spiritual satisfaction. During the first year, my mother had gone into all the pubs and clubs, urging the drunkards to join her at church. She used to sit at the piano and sing, "Have you any room for Jesus?" It was very moving, she said. The men cried into their tankards and stopped playing snooker while she sang. She was plump and pretty, and they called her the Jesus Belle. "Oh, I had my offers," she confided, "and they weren't all godly. Sometimes I think she married in haste. After her awful time with Pierre, she wanted no more upsets. So she married my father and reformed him, and he built the church and never got angry. I thought he was nice, although he didn't say much. At school, I couldn't seem to learn anything or win anything. Not even the draw to get out of being dinner monitor. Dinner monitor meant that you had to make sure everybody had a plate and that the water jug didn't have bits in it. Dinner monitors got served last and had the smallest portions. I'd been drawn to do it 3 times running, and I got shouted at in class for always smelling of gravy. My clothes were gravy-spotted, and my mother made me wear the same gym slip all week because she said there was no point trying to make me look clean as long as I had that duty. Now I was sitting in the shoe bags, with liver and onions all down my front. Sometimes I tried to clean it off, but today I was just too unhappy. My mother was right. It was a breeding ground. And it wasn't as though I hadn't tried. We had been set a project just before we started last autumn. We had to write an essay called "What I Did in My Summer Holidays." I was anxious to do it well, because I knew they thought I couldn't read or anything, not having been to school early enough. I did it slowly in my best handwriting, proud that some of the others could only print. We read them out one by one, then gave them to the teacher. It was all the same. Fishing, swimming, picnics, Walt Disney. 32 essays about gardens and frog spawn. I was at the end of the alphabet, and I could hardly wait. The teacher was the kind of woman who wanted her class to be happy. I wanted to please her, and trembling with anticipation started my essay. This holiday I went to Colwyn Bay with our church camp. The teacher nodded and smiled. It was very hot, and Auntie Betty, whose leg was loose anyway, got sunstroke and we thought she might die. The teacher began to look a bit worried, but the class perked up. But she got better, thanks to my mother, who stayed up all night struggling mightily. "Is your mother a nurse?" asked teacher, with quiet sympathy. "No, she just heals the sick." Teacher frowned. "Well, carry on then." When Auntie Betty got better, we all went in the bus to Llandudno to testify on the beach. I played the tambourine, and Elsie Norris brought her accordion. But a boy threw some sand, and since then she's had no F sharp. We're going to have a jumble sale in the autumn to try and pay for it. When we came back from Colwyn Bay, next door had another baby, but there are so many of them next door we don't know whose it is. My mother gave them some potatoes from the yard, but they said that they weren't a charity and threw them back over the wall. The class had got very quiet. Teacher looked at me. "Is there any more?" "Yes, 2 more sides." "What about?" "Not much. Just how we hired the baths for our baptism service after the healing of the sick crusade." "Very good, but I don't think we'll have time today. Put your work back in your tidy box and do some more colouring till playtime." The class giggled. Slowly I sat down. Not sure what was going on, but sure that something was. When I got home, I told my mother I didn't want to go again. "You've got to," she said. "Here, have an orange." Some weeks passed, in which I tried to make myself as ordinary as possible. It seemed like it was working. And then we started sewing class. On Wednesdays, after toad in the hole and Manchester tart. We did our cross-stitch and chain-stitch, and then we had to think of a project. I decided to make a sampler for Elsie Norris. When it came to me, I said I wanted a text. "What about 'Suffer little children'?" suggested Mrs. Virtue. "No," I said firmly. "It's for my friend, and she reads Jeremiah mostly." I was thinking of "The summer is ended and we are not yet saved." Mrs. Virtue was a diplomatic woman, but she had her blind spots. When it came to listing all the samplers, she wrote the others out in full, and next to mine put text. "Why's that?" I asked. "You might upset the others," she said. "Now, what colours do you want, yellow, green or red?" We looked at each other. "Black," I said. I did upset the children, not intentionally, but effectively. Mrs. Sparrow and Mrs. Spencer came to school one day, all fluffed up with rage. They came at playtime. I saw them, with their handbags and hats, revolving up the concrete, lips pursed. Mrs. Spencer had her gloves on. "We'd like to talk to you," said Mrs. Vole. "Jeanette, we think you may have been having some problems at school. Do you want to tell us about them?" "I'm all right," I shuffled defensively. "You do seem rather preoccupied, shall we say, with God." I continued to stare at the floor. "Your sampler, for instance, had a very disturbing motif." "It was for my friend. She liked it," I burst out, thinking how Elsie's face had lit up when I'd given it to her. "And who is your friend?" "She's called Elsie Norris, and she gave me 3 white mice in the fiery furnace." Mrs. Vole and Miss looked at one another. "And why, this is perhaps more serious, do you terrorise, yes, terrorise, the other children?" "I don't," I protested. "Then can you tell me why I've had Mrs. Spencer and Mrs. Sparrow here this morning, telling me how their children have had nightmares?" "I have nightmares too." "That's not the point. You have been talking about hell to young minds." It was true. I couldn't deny it. I had told all the others about the horrors of the demon and the fate of the damned. I'd illustrated it by almost strangling Susan Hunt, but that was an accident. And I gave her all my cough sweets afterwards. "I'm very sorry," I said. "I thought it was interesting." Mrs. Vole and Miss shook their heads. "You'd better go," said Mrs. Vole. "I shall be writing to your mother." When it came round to prize giving, I took my sampler back from Elsie Norris and entered it for the needlework class. I still think it was a masterpiece of its kind. It had the lettering all in black, and the border all in white, and in the bottom corner a sort of artist's impression of the terrified damned. Elsie had framed it, so it looked quite professional. I didn't win anything with my sampler, though, and I was very disappointed. I took it back to Elsie on the last day of school and asked her if she still wanted it. She snatched it from me and put it firmly on the wall. "It's upside down, Elsie," I pointed out. She fumbled for her glasses and stared at it. So it is, but it's all the same to the Lord. Still, I'll put it right for them that doesn't know." And she carefully adjusted the picture. "I thought you might not like it any more." "Heathen child. The Lord himself was scorned. Don't expect the unwashed to appreciate." Elsie always called the unconverted the unwashed. "Well, it would be nice sometimes," I ventured. Over the years, I did my best to win a prize. Some wish to better the world and still scorn it. But I never succeeded. There's a formula, a secret, I don't know what, that people who have been to public schools or brownies seem to understand. It runs right the way through life. Though it starts with hyacinth growing, passes on through milk monitor, and finishes somewhere at half blue. My hyacinths were pink, 2 of them. I called the ensemble the Annunciation. You have to have a theme. This was because the blooms were huddled up close and reminded me of Mary and Elizabeth soon after the visit by the angel. I thought it was a very clever marriage of horticulture and theology. I put a little explanation at the bottom and the appropriate verse so that people could look it up if they wanted to. But it didn't win. What did win was a straggly white pair called Snow Sisters. So I took the Annunciation home and fed it to our rabbit. I was a bit uneasy afterwards, in case it was heresy, and the rabbit fell sick. "It's not fair," I told Elsie, later that same evening at the sisterhood meeting. "You'll get used to it." "And anyway," blurted out Mrs. White, who had heard the story, "they're not holy." I didn't despair. I did Streetcar Named Desire out of pipe cleaners, an embroidered cushion cover of Bette Davis in Now Voyager, an origami William Tell with real apple, and best of all, a potato sculpture of Henry Ford outside the Chrysler Building in New York. An impressive list by any standards. But I was hopeful, and as foolish, as King Canute forcing back the waves. Whatever I did made no impression at all, except to enrage my mother because I had abandoned biblical themes. She quite liked Now Voyager, because she had done her courting during that film, but she thought I should have made the Tower of Babel out of origami, even though I told her it would be too difficult. "The Lord walked on water," was all she said when I tried to explain. But she had her own problems. A lot of the missionaries had been eaten, which meant she had to explain to their families. "It's not easy," she said, "even though it is for the Lord." The heathen were a daily household preoccupation. My mother found them everywhere, particularly next door. They tormented her as only the godless can, but she had her methods. They hated hymns, and she liked to play the piano, an old upright with pitted candelabra and yellow keys. We each had a copy of the Redemption Hymnal, boards and cloth 3 shillings. My mother sang the tune, and I put in the harmonies. One Sunday morning, just as we got in from communion, we heard strange noises, like cries for help, coming from next door. I took no notice. But my mother froze behind the radiogram and started to change colour. Mrs. White, who had come with us to listen to the World Service, immediately crushed her ear against the wall. "What is it?" I asked. "I don't know," she said in a loud whisper. "But whatever it is, it's not holy." Still, my mother didn't move. "Have you got a wine glass?" urged Mrs. White. My mother looked horrified. "For medicinal purposes, I mean," added Mrs. White hurriedly. My mother went into a high cupboard and reached down a box from the top shelf. "I never use these," she said meaningfully. "Neither do I," said Mrs. White defensively, clamping herself back against the wall. While my mother was covering up the television, Mrs. White slithered up and down the skirting board. "We've just had that wall decorated," my mother pointed out. "It stopped anyway," panted Mrs. White. At that moment another burst of wailing began from next door. Very clear this time. "They're fornicating," said my mother, rushing to put her hands over my ears. "Get off," I yelled. The dogs started barking, and my dad, who'd been on nights the Saturday just gone, came down in his pyjama bottoms. "Put some clothes on," shrieked my mother. "Next door's at it again." I bit my mother's hand. "Let go of my ears. I can hear it too." "On a Sunday," exclaimed Mrs. White. Outside, suddenly the ice cream van. "Go and get 2 cornets and a wafer for Mrs. White," ordered my mother, stuffing 10 shillings into my hand. I ran off. I didn't know quite what fornicating was, but I had read about it in Deuteronomy, and I knew that it was a sin. But why was it so noisy? Most sins you did quietly so as not to get caught. I bought the ice creams and decided to take my time. When I got back, Mother had opened the piano, and she and Mrs. White were looking through the redemption hymnal. I passed round the ice creams. "It stopped," I said brightly. "For the moment," said my mother grimly. As soon as we had finished, my mother wiped her hands in her apron. "Ask the Saviour to help you. We'll sing that. Mrs. White, you be the baritone." No note was exempt. By the time we got to verse 3, next door started to bang on the wall. "Listen to the heathen!" my mother shouted jubilantly, her foot furious on the hard pedal. "Sing it again." And we did, while the heathen, driven mad by the word, rushed away to find what blunt instruments they could to pound on the wall from the other side. Some of them ran into the backyard and yelled over the wall, "Stop that bloody racket!" "On a Sunday, too," tutted Mrs. White, aghast. My mother leapt from the keys and rushed into our backyard to quote the scriptures. She found herself staring at the eldest son, who had a lot of spots. "The Lord help me," she prayed, and a piece of Deuteronomy flashed into her mind. "The Lord will smite you with the boils of Egypt, and with the ulcers and the scurvy and the itch of which you cannot be cured." Revised Standard Version. Then she ran back inside and slammed the back door. "Now then," she smiled, "who's for a bit of dinner?" My mother called herself a missionary on the home front. She said that the Lord hadn't called her to the hot places, like Pastor Spratt and his glory crusade, but to the streets and byways of Lancashire. "I have always been guided by the Lord," she told me. "Look at my Wigan work." A long time ago, very soon after her conversion, my mother had received a strange envelope postmarked Wigan. She had been suspicious, knowing how the devil tempts the newly saved. The only person she knew in Wigan was an old flame who had threatened to kill himself when she married another. "That's up to you," she had said, refusing to correspond. Eventually, curiosity got the upper hand, and she tore open the envelope. It wasn't from Pierre at all, but from one Eli Bone, Reverend, of the Society for the Lost. The crest on the paper was a number of souls gathered round a mountain, with a little arch of text underneath. "Fastened to the rock," it said. My mother read on. Pastor Spratt, leaving Wigan on his way to Africa, had recommended my mother to the society. They were looking for a new treasurer. The last, Mrs. Moore Butler, née Richards, had just got married and was moving to Morecambe. She would be opening a guest house for the bereaved, with special rates for all those who work for the society. A very attractive offer in itself, reminded the Reverend. My mother was very flattered, and decided to accept the Reverend's invitation to go and stay in Wigan for a few days, to find out more about the society. My father was at work at the time, so she left him the address and a note which said, "I'm busy with the Lord in Wigan." She didn't come back for 3 weeks, and after that went regularly to the Reverend Bones to audit the accounts and campaign for new members. She was a good businesswoman, and under her direction, the Society for the Lost almost doubled in membership. The Society held a regular weekend at the Morecambe Guest House once a year, just before the busy season being around Easter, after malingering illnesses contracted during the harsh winter. Of course, there was sometimes an unexpected spate in January, but it's surprising how long people hang on once they know it's the end. My mother, who has always been interested in the end, personal and general, had a friend who used to make most of the wreaths for the Fylde coast. She used to come and stay with us sometimes, and bring her wires and sponges and catalogues. It's funny, they always want the same, never anything adventurous. Although I did a violin once in carnations for a musician's husband. "Crosses," she said bitterly. "That's all I do, crosses. A woman with my training. It's not right." "Couldn't you do weddings as well?" I asked her. "Weddings?" she spat. "What would I do with weddings?" "You get a bit of variety," I suggested. "And what do you think they want at weddings?" she challenged me. I didn't know. I'd never been. Her eyes gleamed down at me. "Crosses," she said, refilling her mug. The weekend we all trooped down to Morecambe for the society spree. The woman was there as well. On contract work, she told us. Apparently, there had been an epidemic at a nearby boarding school. A lot of the pupils were no more, and naturally their parents wanted wreaths. "The school wants 2 tennis rackets in their colours, as a tribute. I'm using mimosas and roses. It's very difficult, but it's a challenge." The woman and I got on very well. Years later, when I was needing a Saturday job, she helped me out. She had gone into partnership with an undertaker, so they could offer the whole package at special rates. "It's a cutthroat business," she told me. They got a load of work between them, and usually needed an extra hand. I went along to help out with the laying out and make-up. At first I was very clumsy. I used too much rouge and smeared it down the cheekbones. I liked my work. I learnt a lot about wood and flowers, and I enjoyed polishing the handles as a final touch. "Always the best," declared the woman. One year, the society had a special conference in our town. My mother campaigned for weeks to make sure we got a good turnout. May and Alice went posting invitations through letterboxes, and Miss Dewsbury was billed to play the oboe. It was an open meeting to inform and encourage new members. The only place we could find to host the meeting was the Reshabite Hall on the corner of Infant Street. "Do you think that's all right?" asked May anxiously. "We won't look too deep," replied my mother. "But are they holy?" insisted Mrs. White. "That's for the Lord to decide," my mother said, very firm. Mrs. White blushed, and later we saw that she'd taken her name off the volunteer list for buns. The conference was booked for a Saturday, and there was always a market near Infant Street on Saturdays, so my mother gave me an orange box and told me to shout at everyone what was happening. I had a bad time. Most of the street traders told me I was in their way, and that they had paid to be there, and that I hadn't, and so on. I didn't mind the abuse. I was well used to that. I never thought it personal. But it was raining, and I wanted to do a good job. Eventually, Mrs. Arkwright from the factory bottom shop took pity on me. She had a stall at weekends, mostly with pet foods, though she would advise on vermin if it was urgent. "I like my little break," she said. She let me put my orange box inside the shelter of her stall, so that I could give out tracts without getting too wet. "The mother's mad, you know," she kept saying. She might have been right, but there was nothing I could do about it. It was spring. The ground still had traces of snow, and I was about to be married. My dress was pure white, and I had a golden crown. As I walked up the aisle, the crown got heavier and heavier, and the dress more and more difficult to walk in. I thought that everyone would point at me, but nobody noticed. Somehow I made it to the altar. The priest was very fat and kept getting fatter, like bubble gum you blow. Finally we came to the moment. You may kiss the bride. My new husband turned to me, and here were a number of possibilities. Sometimes he was blind, sometimes a pig, sometimes my mother, sometimes the man from the post office, and once just a suit of clothes with nothing inside. I told my mother about it, and she said it was because I ate sardines for supper. The next night I ate sausages, but I still had the dream. There was a woman in our street who told us all that she had married a pig. I asked her why she did it, and she said, "You never know until it's too late." Exactly. No doubt, that woman had discovered in life what I had discovered in my dreams. She had unwittingly married a pig. I kept watch on him after that. It was hard to tell he was a pig. He was clever. But his eyes were close together, and his skin bright pink. I tried to imagine him without his clothes on. Horrid. Other men I knew weren't much better. The man who ran the post office was bald and shiny, with hands too fat for the sweet jars. He called me Puppet, which my mother said was nice. He gave me sweets too, which was an improvement. One day he had a new sort. "Sweethearts for a sweetheart," he said and laughed. That day I had almost strangled my dog with rage, and been dragged from the house by a desperate mother. Sweet I was not, but I was a little girl. Ergo I was sweet. And here were sweets to prove it. I looked in the bag. Yellow and pink, and sky blue and orange, and all of them heart-shaped, and all of them said things like, "Maureen loves Ken," "Jack and Jill true." On the way home I crunched at the Maureen loves Kens. I was confused. Everyone always said you found the right man. My mother said it, which was confusing. My auntie said it, which was even more confusing. The man in the post office sold it on sweets. But there was the problem of the woman married to the pig, and the spotty boy who took girls down backs and my dreams. That night, we had to go to my auntie's to play beetle. She was in the team at church and needed to practice. As she dealt the cards, I asked her, "Why are so many men really beasts?" She laughed. "You're too young for that." My uncle had overheard. He came over to me and put his face close. "You wouldn't love us any other way," he said, and rubbed his spiky chin against my face. I hated him. "Leave off, Bill." My auntie pushed him away. "Don't worry, love," she soothed. "You'll get used to it. When I married, I laughed for a week, cried for a month, and settled down for life." She spread the cards. "There's time enough for you to get a boy." "I don't think I want one." "There's what we want," she said, putting down a jack, "and there's what we get. Remember that." Eventually my auntie stood up and sighed. "You might as well go home," she said. I went to fetch my mother, who was in the parlour, listening to Johnny Cash. "Come on, we've finished." Slowly she put on her coat and picked up her little Bible, the travel-size one. We set off together down the street. "I've got to talk to you. Have you got time?" "Yes," she said. "Let's have an orange." I tried to explain my dream, and the beast theory, and how much I hated Uncle Bill. All the time my mother walked along humming "What a Friend We Have in Jesus" and peeling me an orange. She stopped peeling and I stopped talking about the same time. I had one last question. "Why did you marry my dad?" She looked at me closely. "Don't be silly." "I'm not being silly." "We had to have something for you, and besides, he's a good man, though I know he's not one to push himself. But don't you worry. You're dedicated to the Lord. I put you down for a missionary school as soon as we got you. Remember Jane Eyre and St. John Rivers?" A faraway look came into her eyes. I did remember, but what my mother didn't know was I now knew that she had rewritten the ending. Jane Eyre was her favourite non-Bible book, and she read it to me over and over again when I was very small. I couldn't read it, but I knew where the pages turned. Later, literate and curious, I had decided to read it for myself, a sort of nostalgic pilgrimage. I found out that dreadful day in the back corner of the library that Jane Eyre doesn't marry St. John at all, that she goes back to Mr. Rochester. It was like the day I discovered my adoption papers while searching for a pack of playing cards. I have never since played cards, and I have never since read Jane Eyre. We continued our walk in silence. She thought I was satisfied, but I was wondering about her, and wondering where I would go to find out what I wanted to know. When it was wash day, I hid in the dustbin to hear what the women said. Nellie came out with a bit of rope and strung it up nail to nail across the back alley. She waved to Doreen, who was struggling up the hill with her shopping, offering her a cup of tea and a talk. Each Wednesday Doreen queued up at the butcher's for the special offer mince. It always put her in a bad mood because she was a member of the Labour Party and believed in equal shares and equal rights. She started to tell Nellie about the woman in front buying steak. Nellie shook her head, which was small and tufted, and said it had been hard for her too since Bert died. "Bert?" spat Doreen. "He were dead 10 years before they laid him out." Then she offered Nellie a wine gum. "Well, I don't like to speak ill of the dead," said Nellie, uneasily. "You never know." "What about speaking ill of the living? My Frank's up to no good." Nellie took a deep breath and another wine gum. She asked if it was the woman who served pie and peas in the pub. Doreen didn't know. But now that she thought of it, that would explain why he always smelled of gravy when he came in late. "You should never have married him," scolded Nellie. "I didn't know what he was like when I married him, did I?" And she told Nellie about the war, and how her dad had liked him, and how it seemed sensible. "I should have guessed so. What kind of man comes round to court you, and ends up drinking with your dad instead? I used to sit all done up playing whist with his mother and one of her friends." "Did he not take you anywhere then?" "Oh, yes," said Doreen. "We used to go down the dog track every Saturday afternoon." The two of them sat in silence for a while. Then Doreen went on. "Course the children helped. I ignored him for 15 years. "Still," Nellie reassured her, "you're not as bad as Hilda across the road. Her one drinks every penny, and she daren't go to the police." "If man touched me, I'd have him put away," said Doreen grimly. "Would you?" "Let's have a smoke," offered Nellie. "And you tell me about Jane." Jane was Doreen's daughter, just turned 17 and very studious. "If she doesn't get a boyfriend, folks will talk. She spends all her time at that Susan's doing her homework, or so she tells me." Nellie thought that Jane might be seeing a boy on the quiet, pretending to be at Susan's. Doreen shook her head. "She's there all right. I checked with Susan's mother. If they're not careful, folk will think they're like them two in the paper shop." "I like them two," said Nellie firmly. "And who's to say they do anything?" Mrs. Ferguson across the road saw them getting a new bed. A double bed. "Well, what does that prove? Me and Bert had one bed, but we did nothing in it." Doreen said that was all very well, but 2 women were different. Different from what? I wondered inside the dustbin. When it was safe, I crept out as confused as ever and covered in soot. It was a good thing I was destined to become a missionary. For some time after this, I put aside the problem of men and concentrated on reading the Bible. Eventually, I thought, I'd fall in love like everybody else. Then, some years later, quite by mistake, I did. My mother said that we had to go downtown. I'm not coming. Get that mac on. I'm not coming. It's raining. I know, and I'm not going to get wet on my own. She threw that mac at me and turned to the mirror to adjust her headscarf. I kicked the dog out of her box and tried to clip on her lead. My mother spied me. Leave that thing, it'll only get trodden on. But leave it. And she grabbed her shopping bag in one hand and me in the other and dragged me off to the bus, complaining all the way about ingratitude. The bus pulled into the boulevard. My mother always called it that because of her memories of Paris. I was foolish enough to ask if I could have a new Mac. That Mac'll outlast your father, was the retort. We went into the market. My mother always got a mince cheek because the butcher had been her sweetheart once. She said he was a devil, but she still took the mince. While he was wrapping it up, I got my Mac caught on a meat hook and pulled the sleeve off. "Mum," I wailed, waving it at her. "Besom," she cried. Before I could protest any further, she pushed me inside a shop that sold oddments and seconds. "They haven't got any," I said, peering about with some relief. "Oh, yes, they have," answered my mother triumphantly. She was rummaging behind a pile of cardboard boxes that had surplus written on the side, like branded sheep. "Try this one." I put it on. It was enormous. "Look, it's got a hat with it." She thrust a shapeless piece of plastic towards the place she thought my head would be. "Which way round does it go?" I was feeling trapped. "It'll keep you dry whichever way." I remembered a film I'd seen called The Man in the Iron Mask. "It's a bit big," I ventured. "You'll grow into it." "But, Mum..." "We'll have it." "But, Mum..." It was bright pink. We walked in silence to the fish stall. I hated her. I looked at the shrimps. They were pink all over too. I wouldn't have noticed Melanie if I hadn't gone round the other side of the store to look at the aquarium. She was boning kippers on a big marble slab. She used a thin, stained knife and threw the guts into a tin bucket. The clean fish she laid onto greaseproof paper, and every 4th fish had a sprig of parsley. "I'd like to do that," I said. She smiled and carried on. "Do you like doing it?" Still she said nothing, so I slid as discreetly as a person in a pink plastic Mac can to the other side of the tank. I couldn't see very well because of the hood over my eyes. "Can I have some fish bait?" I asked. She looked up, and I noticed her eyes were a lovely grey, like the cat next door. "I'm not supposed to have friends at work." "But I'm not your friend," I pointed out rudely. "No, but they'll think you are," she replied. "Well, I might as well be then," I suggested. She stared at me a moment, then turned away. "Get a move on," hastened my mother, suddenly appearing round the whelk tray. "Can I have a new fish for my tank?" "We've hardly enough money to feed what we've got without another mouth. That damned dog cost enough." "Only a small one, a fantail." "I've said no." And she marched off towards Tricketts. I felt wronged. If she had taught me to read like other children had been taught to read, I wouldn't have these obsessions. I'd be happy with a pet rabbit and the odd stick insect. I looked behind me, but Melanie was gone. Week after week I went back there just to watch. Then one week She wasn't there anymore. There was nothing I could do but stare and stare at the whelks. Whelks are strange and comforting. They have no notion of community life, and they breed very quietly. But they have a strong sense of personal dignity. Even lying face down in a tray of vinegar, there is something noble about a whelk, which cannot be said for everybody. Why do I feel like this? I wondered. Then, just as I was about to turn away and buy myself a baked potato for comfort, I saw Melanie walking round to the stall. I went straight up to her. She looked a bit surprised. "Hello, I thought you'd left." "I have left. I've got a job in the library now, just Saturday mornings." What could I say next? How could I make her stay? "Would you like a baked potato?" I offered wildly. She smiled and said she would, and we went to eat it on a bench outside of Woolworths. I was very nervous, and the pigeons got most of mine. She talked about the weather and her mother, and that she had no father. "I haven't either," I said, trying to make her feel better. "Well, not much." Then I had to explain about our church, and my mother, and me being dedicated to the Lord. It sounded odd for a moment, but I knew that was just because I felt nervous. I asked her if she went to church, and she said she did, but not a very lively one, so of course I invited her to ours the next day. "Melanie," I plucked up courage to ask at last, "why do you have such a funny name?" She blushed. "When I was born, I looked like a melon." "Don't worry," I reassured her. "You don't anymore." The first time that Melanie came to our church was not a success. I'd forgotten that Pastor Finch was visiting on his regional tour. He arrived in an old Bedford van with the Terrified Damned painted on one side and the Heavenly Host painted on the other. On the back doors and the front bonnet he'd inscribed in green lettering, "Heaven or Hell, it's your choice." He was very proud of that bus, and told of the many miracles worked inside and out. Inside had 6 seats so that the choir could travel with him, leaving enough room for musical instruments and a large first aid kit in case the demon combusted somebody. "What do you do about the flames?" we asked. "I use an extinguisher," he explained. We were very impressed. There was a collapsible cross that fitted across the back door, and a very small sink so that the pastor could wash his hands after every operation. "Water is of the essence," he reminded us. "Just as Christ bade the swine leap into the sea, so I rinse the demon under this tap." After we had all admired the bus for long enough, Pastor Finch led us back into the church and asked his choir to sing his latest composition. It came to me from the Lord, just as I had left Sandbach motorway services. The song was called "You Don't Need Spirits When You've Got the Spirit." The chorus went like this: "Not whiskey rye, not gin and dry, not rum and coke for me. Not brandy fizz, but a spiritual whiz puts the fire in me. The Lord is working mightily," puffed Pastor Finch, smacking the bongos with his palms. "Praise the Lord!" "Roy, don't tax yourself so," fussed Mrs. Finch, who was desperately trying to keep up on the piano. "Somebody take those bongos off him!" But nobody did, and it wasn't until Mrs. Rothwell fell over that we finally stopped. It was only then that I noticed that Melanie hadn't joined in. "Now for the sermon," shouted Pastor Finch, and we all settled back to enjoy ourselves. He told us about the doings of his tour, how many souls had been saved, how many good souls oppressed by the demon had found peace once again. "I'm not one to boast," he reminded us, "but the Lord has given me a mighty gift." We murmured our agreement. Then we were shocked as he described the epidemic of demons, even now spreading through the northwest. Lancashire and Cheshire had been particularly blighted. Only the day before he had cleansed the whole family in Cheadle Hulme. Ridden they were. His eyes roamed around the hushed congregation. Yes, ridden, and do you know why? He took a step back. We didn't make a sound. Unnatural passions! A tremor shook the gathering. Not all of us were sure what he meant, but all of us knew it was dreadful. I glanced across at Melanie. She looked as though she was going to be sick. Must be the spirit, I thought, and gave her hand a little squeeze. She jumped and stared at me. Yes, definitely the spirit. At the end of his very fine sermon, Pastor Finch made an appeal. He urged any sinner to raise their hand and ask forgiveness there and then. We bowed our heads in prayer, squinting up now and again to see if it was working. Suddenly, I felt a hand on mine. It was Melanie. "I'm going to do it," she hissed, and pushed her other arm into the air. "Yes, I see your hand," acknowledged Pastor Finch. A ripple of joy ran through the church. There was no one else, so Melanie had plenty of attention at the end of the service. Not that she wanted it. "I feel terrible," she confided. "Don't worry," breathed Alice, who was passing by. "It's homeopathic." Poor Melanie. She didn't understand any of them. She just knew that she needed Jesus. Then she asked me to be her counsellor, and I agreed to go round to her house every Monday, while her mum was at the club where she worked, and we read the Bible together and usually spent half an hour in prayer. I was delighted. She was my friend, and I wasn't used to that, apart from Elsie. Somehow this was different. I talked about her all the time at home, and my mother never responded. Then, one day, she bundled me into the kitchen and said that we had to talk seriously. "It's time," she went on, very solemn, "that I told you about Pierre and how I nearly came to a bad end." Then she poured us both a cup of tea and opened a packet of Royal Scot. I was enthralled. It's not something I'm proud of, and I'll say it only once. My mother had been headstrong, and had got a job teaching in Paris, which was a very daring thing to do at the time. She had lived off the Rue Saint-Germain, eaten croissants, and lived a clean life. She wasn't with the Lord then, but she had high standards. Then, one sunny day, without warning, she had been walking towards the river when she met Pierre. Or rather, Pierre had jumped from his bicycle, offered her his onions, and named her the most beautiful woman that he'd ever seen. Naturally, I was flattered. They exchanged addresses and began to court one another. It was then that my mother experienced a feeling she had never known before, a fizzing and a buzzing, and a certain giddiness, not only with Pierre, but with anyone, anywhere, any time. Well, I thought it must be love. But this puzzled her, because Pierre wasn't very clever, and didn't have much to say, except to exclaim how beautiful she was. Perhaps he was handsome, but no. Looking in the magazine, she realised he wasn't that either, but the feeling wouldn't go away. Then, on a quiet night, after a quiet supper, Pierre had seized her and begged her to stay with him that night. The fizzing began, and as he clutched her to him, she felt sure she would never love another. And yes, she would stay, and after that they would marry. Lord, forgive me. But I did it. My mother stopped, overcome with emotion. I begged her to finish the story, proffering the Royal Scots. The worst is still to come. I speculated on the worst, while she chewed her biscuit. Perhaps I wasn't a child of God at all, but the daughter of a Frenchman. A couple of days afterwards, my mother had gone to see the doctor in a fit of guilty anxiety. She lay on the couch while the doctor prodded her stomach and chest, asking if she ever felt giddy or fizzy in the belly. My mother coyly explained that she was in love, and that she often felt strange, but that wasn't the reason for her visit. "You may well be in love," said the doctor, "but you also have the stomach ulcer." Imagine my mother's horror. She had given away her all for an ailment. She took the tablets, followed the diet, and refused Pierre's entreaties to visit her. Needless to say, the next time that they met, and again by chance, she felt nothing at all, and shortly fled the country to avoid him. "Then am I began. "There was no issue," she said quickly. For a few moments we sat silent. Then, "So you just take care. What you think is the heart might well be another organ." "It might, Mother, it might," I thought. She got up and told me to go and find something to do. I decided to go and see Melanie. But just as I reached the door, she called me back with a word of warning. "Don't let anyone touch you. Down there." And she pointed to somewhere at the level of her apron pocket. "No, Mother," I said meekly, and fled. When I reached Melanie's, it was getting dark. I had to cut through the churchyard to get there, and sometimes I'd steal her a bunch of flowers from the new graves. She was always pleased. But then I never told her where they came from. She asked me if I wanted to stay overnight, because her mum was away, and she didn't like being in the house on her own. I said I'd ring a neighbour, and after much trouble finally got an agreement from my mother, who had to be fetched from the lettuces. We read the Bible as usual, and then we told each other how glad we were that the Lord had brought us together. She stroked my head for a long time, and then we hugged, and it felt like drowning. Then I was frightened, but I couldn't stop. There was something crawling in my belly. I had an octopus inside me. And it was evening, and it was morning. Another day. After that, we did everything together, and I stayed with her as often as I could. "Do you think this is unnatural passion?" I asked her once. "Doesn't feel like it. According to Pastor Finch, that's awful." She must be right, I thought. "There," declared my mother, laying down the vacuum cleaner. "You could keep a coffin in here without feeling guilty. Not a speck of dust anywhere." Mrs. White came out of the lobby waving a dishcloth. "I've done all the skirting boards, but my back's not what it was." "No," my mother answered, shaking her head. "These things are sent to trials." "Well, at least we know they're holy," said Mrs. White. The parlour was certainly very clean. I poked my head round the door and noticed that all the seat covers had been changed to our very best, my mother's wedding best, a present from her friends in France. The brasses gleamed, and Pastor Spratt's crocodile nutcracker took pride of place on the mantelpiece. "Hello," I said. "What's going on?" Mrs. White turned round and gave a little screech. "You're supposed to be at violin practice." "It's cancelled. Anybody else here?" "Your mother's gone out." She sounded a bit nervous, but then she often did. "Well, I'll take the dog out then," I decided. "I'm just going to the toilet," said Mrs. White, disappearing out of the back door. "There's no paper," I began, but it was too late. We set off up the hill, climbing and climbing, until the town was beaten flat. The dog ran off down a trench, and I tried to spot various landmarks, like the dentist and the Rechabites Hall. I thought I might go and see Melanie that night. I had told my mother as much as I could, but not everything. I had a feeling that she wouldn't really understand. Besides, I wasn't quite certain what was happening myself. It was the second time in my life that I'd experienced uncertainty. Uncertainty to me was like aardvark to other people. Curious thing I had no notion of but recognised through second-hand illustrations. The feeling I now had in my head and stomach was the same as on that awful occasion. And that time, as I stood by the tea urn in the vestry, I had heard Miss Dewsbury say, "Of course she must feel very uncertain." I was very upset. Uncertainty was what the heathen felt, and I was chosen by God. That awful occasion was the time that my natural mother had come to claim me back. I'd had an idea that there was something curious about the circumstances of my birth, and I once found my adoption papers hidden under a stack of flannels in the holiday drawer. "Formalities," my mother had said, waving me away. "You were always mine. I had you from the Lord." I didn't think about it again, until there was a knock on the door one Saturday. My mother got there before me because she was praying in the parlour. I followed her down the lobby. "Who is it, Mum?" She didn't answer. "Who is it?" "Go inside until I tell you." I remembered something I'd seen Mrs. White do on the fornication occasion. Reaching far back into the wall cupboard behind the dried egg, I found a wine glass and put it up against the wall. It worked. I could hear every word. After 5 minutes, I put the glass away, picked up our dog, and cried and cried and cried. Eventually, my mother came in. "She's gone." I know who she was. Why didn't you tell me? "It's nothing to do with you." "She's my mother." No sooner had I said that than I felt a blow that wrapped round my head like a bandage. I lay on the lino looking up into the face. "I'm your mother," she said very quietly. She was the carrying case. I wanted to see her. "She's gone and she'll never come back." My mother turned away and locked herself in the kitchen. I couldn't think, and I couldn't breathe, so I started to run. When I finally went home that day, my mother was watching television. She never spoke of what had happened, and neither did I. Knowing Melanie was a much happier thing. So why was I beginning to feel so uncomfortable? And why did I not always tell my mother where I stayed at night? Now that Elsie was in hospital, we had to be more careful. She stayed at my house once, and my mother very carefully made up a camp bed in my room. "We don't need it," I told her. "Yes, you do," she told me. Early in the morning, about 2 a.m. after the World Service closed down, we heard her come slowly up the stairs to bed. I had learned to move quickly. She stood by my door for a few moments, then suddenly pushed it open. I could just see the braid of the bottom of her dressing gown. Nobody moved, and then she was gone. She kept a light on all night. Soon afterwards I decided to tell her how I felt. I explained how much I wanted to be with Melanie, that I could talk to her, that I needed that kind of friend, and... But I never managed to talk about "and." "Hello," I shouted, wiping my feet on the mat. The house was quite still. She had been there recently, because the coffee table in the parlour now had a Bible and promise box on it. She'd taken a promise out too. I looked at the rolled-up bit of paper. "The Lord is your strength and shield." Mrs. White's coat had gone, but she'd left a dishcloth on the chair. I took it into the kitchen. There was a note on the cupboard. "Gone to stay at Mrs. White's. Come to church in the morning." Now, my mother never stayed in other people's houses, except when she went to Wigan on a business. It suited me, though. I could go and stay with Melanie. So I fed our dog, had a wash and set off. Melanie was doing the gardening. "What's your mum planning tonight?" I asked her. "She's going to the club, then staying with Auntie Irene." "What do you want to do?" I went on, pulling up a few weeds. She smiled at me with those lovely cat-grey eyes and tugged at her rubber gloves. I put the kettle on for a hot water bottle. We talked a lot that night about our plans. Melanie really did want to be a missionary, even though it was my destiny. "Why don't you like the idea?" she wanted to know. "I don't like hot places, that's all. I got sunstroke in painting last year." We were very quiet, and I traced the outline of her marvellous bones and the triangle of muscle in her stomach. What is it about intimacy that makes it so very disturbing? Over breakfast the next morning, she told me she intended to go to university to read theology. I didn't think it was a good thing, on account of modern heresies. She thought she should understand how other people saw the world. "But you know they're wrong," I insisted. "Yes, but it might be interesting." "Come on, we'll be late for church. You're not preaching, are you?" "No," I said. "I was supposed to, but they changed it." We bustled through the kitchen, and I stood on the stairs to kiss her. "I love you, almost as much as I love the Lord," I laughed. She looked at me, and her eyes clouded for a moment. "I don't know," she said. By the time we got to church, the first hymn was underway. My mother glared at me, and I tried to look sorry. We had slid in next to Miss Dewsbury, who told me to keep calm. "What do you mean?" I whispered. "Come and talk to me afterwards," she hissed, "but not till we're out of sight." I decided she'd gone mad. I was still deep in these contemplations when I realised that something disturbing was happening. The church had gone very quiet, and the pastor was standing on his lower platform with my mother next to him. She was weeping. I felt a searing pain against my knuckles. It was Melanie's ring. Then Miss Dewsbury was urging me to my feet, saying, keep calm, and I was walking out to the front with Melanie. I shot a glance at her. She was pale. "These children of God," began the pastor, "have fallen under Satan's spell." His hand was hot and heavy on my neck. Everyone in the congregation looked like a waxwork. "These children of God have fallen foul of their lusts." "Just a minute," I began, but he took no notice. "These children are full of demons." A cry of horror ran through the church. "I'm not," I shouted, "and neither is she." "Listen to Satan's voice," said the pastor to the church, pointing at me. "How are the best become the worst?" "What are you talking about?" I asked, desperate. "Do you deny you love this woman with a love reserved for man and wife?" "No. Yes, I mean, of course I love her." "I will read you the words of St. Paul," announced the pastor, and he did, and many more words besides, about unnatural passions and the mark of the demon. "To the pure all things are pure," I yelled at him. "It's you, not us." He turned to Melanie. "Do you promise to give up this sin and beg the Lord to forgive you?" "Yes." She was trembling uncontrollably. I hardly heard what she said. "Then go into the vestry with Mrs. White, and the elders will come and pray for you. It's not too late for those who truly repent." He turned to me. "I love her." "Then you do not love the Lord." "Yes, I love both of them." "You cannot." "I do, let me go." But he caught my arm and held me fast. "The church will not see you suffer. Go home and wait for us to help you." I ran out onto the street, wild with distress. Miss Dewsbury was waiting for me. "Come on," she said briskly. "Let's go and get some coffee and decide what we're going to do." I went along with her, not thinking of anything but Melanie and her loveliness. When we reached Miss Dewsbury's house, she banged the kettle onto the gas ring and pushed me by the fire. My teeth were chattering and I couldn't talk. "I've known you for years, and you were always headstrong. Why haven't you been a bit more careful?" I just stared into the fire. "No one need ever have found out if you hadn't tried to explain to that mother of yours." "She's all right," I murmured mechanically. "She's mad," replied Miss Dewsbury very certainly. "I didn't tell her everything." "She's a woman of the world. Even though she'd never admit it to me, she knows about feelings, especially women's feelings." This wasn't something that I wanted to go into. "Who told you what was going on?" I asked abruptly. "Elsie," she said. "Elsie? This was too much. She tried to protect you. And when she got ill that last time, she told me." "Why?" "Because it's my problem too. Drink this." She gave me a glass. "It's brandy." "I think I'll have to lie down," I said feebly. I don't know how long I slept. The curtains were drawn and my shoulders felt very heavy. At first I couldn't remember why my head hurt. Then, as the panic in my stomach got clearer, I started to go over the morning's events. Miss Dewsbury came in. "Feeling better?" "Not much," I sighed. "Perhaps this will help." And she began to stroke my head and shoulders. I turned over so that she could reach my back. Her hand crept lower and lower. She bent over and I could feel her breath on my neck. Quite suddenly, I turned and kissed her. We made love, and I hated it, but would not stop. It was morning when I crept home. I had a plan to go straight off to school, hoping no one would notice. I expected my mother to be in bed. I was wrong. There was a strong smell of coffee and voices coming from the parlour. As I tiptoed past, I realised they were having a prayer meeting. I got my things ready and was all packed up to leave. On the way out, they caught me. "Jeanette!" cried out one of the elders, dragging me into the parlour. "Our prayers have been answered." "Where did you stay last night?" asked my mother sulkily. "I can't remember." "That Miss Dewsbury's, I'll bet." "Oh, she's not holy," piped up Mrs. White. "No," I told them all. "Not there." "What does it matter?" urged the pastor. "She's here now, and it's not too late." "I've got to go to school." "Not at all. Not at all," the pastor smiled. "Come and sit down." My mother absently passed me a plate of biscuits. It was 8:30 a.m. It was 10 p.m. that same night before the elders went home. They had spent the day praying over me, laying hands on me and urging me to repent my sins before the Lord. "Renounce her, renounce her," the pastor kept saying. "It's only the demon." My mother made cups of tea and forgot to wash the dirty ones. The parlour was full of cups. Mrs. White sat on one and cut herself. Someone else spilt theirs. But they didn't stop. I still couldn't think. I could only see Melanie's face and Melanie's body, and every so often the outline of Miss Dewsbury bending over me. At 10 p.m, the pastor heaved a great sigh and offered me one last chance. "I can't," I said. "I just can't." "We'll come back the day after tomorrow," he confided to my mother. "Meantime, don't let her out of this room, and don't feed her. She needs to lose strength before it can be hers again." My mother nodded, 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 and locked me in. She did give me a blanket, but she took away the light bulb. Over the 36 hours that followed, I thought about the demon and some other things besides. When the pastor and the elders came back, I was calm, cheerful and ready to accept. "I'll repent," I said, as soon as they came into the parlour. The pastor seemed surprised. "Are you sure?" "Sure." I wanted to get it over with as quickly as possible. Besides, I hadn't eaten for 2 days. All the elders knelt down to pray, and I knelt down beside them. It was all over very quickly, really, and my mother had just put a joint in the oven. "I hope you'll testify on Sunday," said the pastor, hugging me. "Yes," I said, squashed. "What will Melanie do?" "She's gone away for a while," Mrs. White put in, "to recover. You'll see how much better she is in a few weeks." Melanie was staying with relatives in Halifax. I told my mother I had to spend the night in the church. She seemed to understand. And so I made Miss Dewsbury drive me the 25 miles across to where I needed to be. "You'll pick me up at 7 a.m?" She nodded, biting her lip. "You know I have to see her. Make sure I'm safe." As soon as it grew shadowy, I rang the doorbell. "Is Melanie here?" I asked the woman. "I'm a friend from school." "Yes, come in." "No, I won't, thanks. I'll just give her a message, if she'll come out." Melanie came to the door. When she saw me, she tried to shut it. "I've got to talk to you," I begged. "Go upstairs in about half an hour. I'll go up now and wait for you." She nodded and let me slip past. I heard her say goodbye very loudly and shut the door. No one seemed to think anything of it. It was a crisis, and once again I fell asleep. "Jeanette," said Melanie, "I think you've got a temperature." She was sitting beside me drinking a cup of tea. She looked tired and crumpled, like a balloon full of old air. I touched her cheek, but she winced and pulled away. "What do they do to you?" I asked. "Nothing. I repented. And they told me I should try and go away for a week." "We can't see each other. It's wrong." She started to tug at the quilt, and I couldn't bear it any more. I think we cried each other to sleep, but somewhere in the night I stretched out to her and kissed her, until we were both sweating and crying with mixed-up bodies and swollen faces. She was still asleep when I heard Miss Dewsbury sound her horn. The next thing that happened to me was glandular fever. "It's her humours," my mother pronounced. Certainly it was the belief of the faithful that God was cleansing me of all my demons, and there was no doubt that I could be welcomed back into the fold as soon as I recovered. "The Lord forgives and forgets," the pastor told me. Perhaps the Lord does, but my mother didn't. While I lay shivering in the parlour, she took a tooth-comb to my room and found all the letters, all the cards, all the jottings of my own, and burnt them one night in the backyard. There are different sorts of treachery, but betrayal is betrayal wherever you find it. She burnt a lot more than the letters that night in the backyard. I don't think she knew. By the summer, I was my old self again. Melanie had gone away before starting university, and I was preparing my sermons for a tent mission we had all planned in Blackpool. No one mentioned the incident, and no one seemed to notice that Miss Dewsbury had picked up her oboe and left. So, one sunny day, we piled into the bus and set off for Blackpool. "I wish we had Elsie with that accordion," Mrs. Rothwell sighed. "She's better where she is," returned my mother rather sharply. Our first meeting that night was a great success. I was down to preach, and as usual a great number found the Lord. "She's lost none of her gifts, has she?" May grinned at my mother. "I got to her in time, that's why," was all my mother could say, and she went back to the guest house. The following day, we were all due to meet under the tower to give out tracts for the coming evening's meeting. May had a big sandwich board that said, "Seek ye the Lord while he may be found." My name's in that text, she told everyone with pride. So I knew it was my duty to carry it. We did quite well for a tract session. We had 3 street conversions, and a few people who promised to come back for the night. "Afternoon off," the pastor told everyone. "What about the zoo?" asked May perkily. "I want to see the little monkeys." "She's coming up to the tower with me," announced my mother stiffly. "They've got an exhibition of great film stars." "I'm going for a walk on the prom," I told them both, and set off. Katie sat in a deck chair, and Katie looked at the sun. Katie ate an ice cream, and Katie looked like fun. "Hello," I sat down beside her. "Are you staying near here?" "No, I came on the tram. Thought I might as well be in time for tonight." "You don't live far from our church at home, though, do you?" "No, Oswald Twistle is where we live. It's a bus ride." "Well, we'll see each other then." She looked at me for a moment, and I thought it best to go and inspect the gospel tent. The harvest festival came and went. Then, as the wind got up and the night started drawing in, we turned our thoughts to nativity, and how best to explain the Christmas message. The problem was, who should write the script for the nativity play? It was unanimously decided it ought to be my mother, on account of her education. My mother blushed and said she couldn't, and accepted. She bought typing paper and a new dictionary, and told my dad and me to do the best we could. She had the Lord's work to do. All through the following day she scribbled and sighed in the parlour, surrounded by cheese sandwiches and pictures of Bethlehem in winter. Soon came the Sunday of the nativity play. The children had rehearsed for weeks, and my father had built the set. My mother wore a new hat, and I sat next to Katie, holding the prompt boards. The church was full of the heathen come to see their offspring perform. Even Mrs. Arkwright from the vermin shop was there. Little Donkey went well, and the first scene, No Room in the Inn, was well underway when the side door opened and a figure slipped in trying to be quiet. I squinted through the darkness. It looked familiar. "Oh, Joseph, we'll have to sleep in the stable." The halo of hair was getting more visible as the shepherds scuttled on with their lanterns. The last I heard that evening was, "Do not fear, I bring you tidings of great joy." At the back of the church was Melanie. As soon as the service ended, I left my mother to her triumph and went home. I was trembling with fear. As far as I was concerned, Melanie was dead. No one mentioned her, and as her mother never came to church, there was no need to remember. At 9 o'clock there was a knock at the door. I knew who it was, but praying that it might be carol singers, I went to answer it, in faith, with a few ready pennies. "Hello," she said. "Can I come in?" I moved to let her pass. She had put on some weight and looked quite serene. Over the half hour that followed, she chatted about her course, her friends, her holiday plans. Did I want to go for a walk with her one day? No. She said her mother intended to move away soon. Far away, down south. This would be Melanie's last time behind the power station. I shall come and say goodbye to her mother. No. At last, she put on her gloves and beret, and very lightly kissed me goodbye. I felt nothing. But when she'd gone, I pulled up my knees under my chin and begged the Lord to set me free. Thankfully, it was a busy time. The day after, we were all due down at the town hall to sing our carols, the Sally Army permitting. We had a grand time at first. May had bought new ribbons for a tambourine, and my mother was playing the harmonium under a huge green fishing umbrella lent by the Christian Anglers Association. What about the holly and the ivy? Too pagan. What about We Three Kings? You start then. And we did. We drew a big crowd that day. Some came to laugh, but most put a contribution in the tin and joined in on the ones they knew. I saw Melanie standing with a bunch of mistletoe. She waved across the heads, but I pretended not to see. On the way to the bus stop, I felt a hand on my shoulder, and there was Melanie, still serene and smiling, ready to catch the same bus as me. "Want an orange?" she offered as we sat close, in a steady silence. She made to peel it. I grabbed her arm. "No, don't do that. I mean, I'll be having tea soon, don't waste it." Again she smiled, and talked of this and that, until at last it was my stop, and hers, miles away. I jumped up, jumped off, and ran as fast as I could while Melanie gazed benignly from the top deck. I had to head the Bible study that night, despite my sudden nervousness and the worry that I was getting ill again. Katie was there, and she saw my troubled face and wanted to help. "Come and stay this weekend," she offered. "We'll have to sleep in the caravan, but it won't be cold." I hadn't stayed anywhere for a long time. I thought it might do me good. "I'll bring in the caligas," said Katie, "so we won't be cold." We weren't cold. Not that night, nor any of the others we spent together over the years that followed. She was my most uncomplicated love affair, and I loved her because of it. She seemed to have no worries at all. And though she still denies it, I think she planned the caravan. "Are you sure this is what you want?" I murmured, not intending to stop. "Oh, yes," she cried, "yes." We stopped talking about it quickly, because the dialogue was getting too embarrassing. She was blissful. I took care never to look at her when I preached, though she always sat in the front row. We did have a genuinely spiritual dimension. I taught her a lot, and she put all her efforts into the church, quite apart from me. It was a good time. To the pure, all things are pure. A year had passed since Melanie's Easter and my illness. It was Easter time again, and the Church of England was winding its way up the hill carrying the cross. On Palm Sunday, Melanie returned, beaming with an important announcement. She was to be married that autumn to an army man. To be fair, he had given up the bad fight for the good fight. But as far as I was concerned, he was revolting. I had no quarrel with men. At that time there was no reason that I should. The women in our church were strong and organised. If you want to talk in terms of power, I had enough to keep Mussolini happy. So I didn't object to Melanie getting married. I objected to her getting married to him. And she was serene to the point of being bovine. I was so angry. I tried to talk to her about it, but she had left her brain in Bangor. She left the day after to stay with him and his parents. Just as they were driving off on his horrible Iron Curtain motorbike, he patted my arm, told me he knew, and forgave us both. There was only one thing I could do. Mustering all my spit, I did it. Katie and I had gone away together for a week at the Morecambe Guest House for the bereaved. It was the slack season, so anyone could go, grieving or not, though they were always very strict in winter. Katie's family were on holiday in their caravan nearby, so we were considered safe. I had been careful to keep any letters in my Saturday job locker, and as far as I could tell, we were above suspicion. We were careless, though, that first night on holiday. The thought of having a whole week alone left us over-eager, and I forgot to lock the door. She had pulled me onto the bed. Then I noticed a thin shaft of light staining the carpet by the edge of the bed. My neck prickled and my mouth went dry. Someone was standing by the door. We didn't move. And after a moment the light disappeared. Flopping down by Katie's side, I squeezed her hand tight and promised her we'd think of something. We did. The plan was the most fanciful of my brilliant career, and from her point of view it worked perfectly. There was no hope for me. At breakfast time, we were summoned to the office of my mother's old friend and erstwhile treasurer of the Society for the Lost. "I want the truth," she said, not looking at either of us. "And don't think to fool me." I told her that my affair with Melanie had never really ended, that Melanie had written to me for months, and that finally, torn with love myself, I had begged Katie to help me arrange a meeting. This was the one place I thought we could be safe, I told her as I wept. She believed me. She wanted to. I knew she wouldn't fancy explaining to Katie's family, and I knew she wanted to upset my mother as much as possible. Forcing all the blame on me would do that. She told me to pack and be ready to leave by the morning. She wanted her letter to arrive home before I did. Katie was safe. That was the important thing. She was stubborn and angry like me, but unlike me, she couldn't cope with the darker side of our church. I'd seen her kick against it before, seen her kick and cry. I was determined that they shouldn't start the demon stuff on her. Of course, the scene at home had been incredible. My mother smashed every plate in the kitchenette. "There's no supper," she told her husband when he came in off the late shift. "There's nothing left to eat it off." He went to the fish and chip shop and ate them at the counter. "Oh, I'm a fool to myself," she thundered, "keeping you as long as I have. Letting you do more exams, and for what?" She shook me. "For what?" I pulled away. "Leave me alone." "You'll be left alone soon enough." And she went round to the telephone box to call the pastor. When she came back, she ordered me to bed, and it seemed best to obey. My bed was narrow. I lay in it, unable to forgive myself, unable to forgive her. At regular intervals, I heard her calling on the Lord to send a sign. Certainly the pastor arrived, but glad as she was, I think she would have preferred something a bit more spectacular, like for me and my bedroom to be consumed with flames while the rest of the house escaped. Downstairs, they talked in low voices for a long time. I was almost asleep when the pastor appeared with my mother hovering in the background. He stood a safe distance away, like I was infected. I put my head under the pillow because I couldn't think of anything else to do. The pastor snatched it away and explained to me, as quietly as he could, that I was the victim of great evil, that I was afflicted and oppressed, that I had deceived the flock. "The demon," he announced very slowly, "has returned sevenfold." The days lingered on in a kind of numbness, me in ecclesiastical quarantine, them in a state of fear and anticipation. By Sunday, the pastor had word back from the council. The real problem, it seemed, was going against the teachings of St. Paul and allowing women power in the church. Our branch of the church had never thought about it. We'd always had strong women, and the women organised everything. Some of us could preach, and quite plainly in my case, the church was full because of it. There was uproar. Then a curious thing happened. My mother stood up and said she believed this was right, that women had specific circumstances for their ministry, that the Sunday school was one of them, the sisterhood another. But the message belonged to the men. Until this moment, my life had still made some kind of sense. Now it was making no sense at all. My mother droned on about the importance of missionary work for a woman, that I was clearly such a woman, but had spurned my call in order to wield power on the home front, where it was inappropriate. She ended by saying that having taken on a man's world in other ways, I had flouted God's law and tried to do it sexually. This was no spontaneous speech. She and Pastor had talked about it already. It was her weakness for the ministry that had done it. No doubt she'd told Pastor Spratt months ago. I looked around me. Good people. Simple people. What would happen to them now? I knew that my mother hoped I would blame myself, but I didn't. I knew now where the blame lay. If there was such a thing as spiritual adultery, my mother was a whore. So there I was, my success in the pulpit being the reason for my downfall. The devil had attacked me at my weakest point, my inability to realize the limitations of my sex. A voice from the back. "That's a load of twaddle, and you know it. Now are we helping this child or not?" It was Elsie. Someone tried to sit her down, but she kept on struggling, and then she started coughing, and then she fell over. "Elsie!" I ran down to the back, but got pulled away. "She can do without you." The others gathered around while I stood helpless and shaking. "Get a warm coat and let's get her home." And they bundled her out into the porch. While this was going on, the pastor came up to me and said that as a mark of new obedience to the Lord, I was to give up all preaching, Bible study classes, and any form of what he called influential contact. As soon as I had agreed, he would arrange for a further, more powerful exorcism, and then I was to go on holiday with my mother for a fortnight, to the Morecambe guest house. "I'll tell you in the morning," I promised, pleading tiredness. When the pastor came around the next morning, I felt better. We had a cup of tea, the three of us. I think my mother told a joke. It was settled. "Shall I book you in for the holiday then?" the pastor asked, fiddling for his diary. "She's expecting you, but it's only polite. How's Elsie?" This was bothering me. The pastor frowned and said that last night had upset her more than we had realized. She'd gone back into hospital for a check-up. Will she be all right? My mother pointed out that it was for the Lord to decide, and we had other things to think about. The pastor smiled gently and asked again when we wanted to go. "I'm not going." He told me I'd need a rest after the struggle, that my mother needed a rest. She can go. I'm leaving the church, so you can forget the rest. They were dumbfounded. I held on tight to the little brown pebble and hoped they'd go away. They didn't. They reasoned and pleaded and stormed and took a break and then came back. They even offered me my Bible class, though under supervision. Finally, the pastor shook his head and declared me one of the people in Hebrews to whom it is impossible to speak the truth. He asked me one last time, "Will you repent?" "No." And I stared at him till he looked away. He took my mother off into the parlour for half an hour. I don't know what they did in there, but it didn't matter. My mother had painted the white roses red, and now she claimed they grew that way. "You'll have to leave," she said. "I'm not having demons here." Where could I go? Not to Elsie, she was too sick. And no one in the church would really take the risk. If I went to Katie's, there would be problems for her. And all my relatives, well, like most relatives, were revolting. I don't have anywhere to go, I argued, following her into the kitchen. The devil looks after his own, she threw back, pushing me out. I knew I couldn't cope, so I didn't try. I would let the feelings out later, when it was safe. For now, I had to be hard and white. In the frosty days, in the winter, the ground is white. Then the sun rises and the frosts melt. I'd gone back to work at the undertaker's, or funeral parlour, as the woman and her friend Jo preferred to call it. They paid well, and I could always do a bit of extra washing of the cars if I needed more money. Sometimes I had to park the ice cream van round the back, lay some person out round the front, then get on with my round again. Jo used to joke about dropping the bodies in my freezer when the weather turned warm. They'll not notice a bit of raspberry ripple, will they? On Saturday, as I drove the ice cream van round Lower Fold, I saw a crowd of people milling outside the end terrace. The end terrace was Elsie's house. I tried to drive straight there, but somebody wanted a lolly, then somebody wanted a wafer, and my hands shook and I couldn't make the scoops. "Bit sloppy, you," a fat woman complained. "Have a free choc ice," I said, throwing it at her. Then, as she stood staring, hands on hips, with her choc ice poking out of her pinny pocket, I roared the engine and bounced down the cobbles. No one took any notice of me parking the van, or getting out, or pushing through to Elsie's door. In the parlour were Mrs. White, the pastor, and my mother. No Elsie. "What's happening?" I demanded. They glanced at me, but carried on discussing in low voices. I caught the words funeral arrangements. Then I grabbed my mother by her coat sleeve. "Will you tell me what's going on?" She brushed her coat sleeve. "Elsie's dead." The pastor came up to me. "Go home, please, Jeanette." "And where do you suppose that is?" I shot back at him. He never flinched, just took me by the arm and led me into the lobby. "We haven't really talked much, have we?" he asked. I didn't answer, just looked at the floor, wanting to cry. "You should have trusted me." His voice was soft. "What are you afraid of?" I suddenly wanted to know. He smiled. "I am afraid of hell, of eternal damnation." "So what's so awful about me?" Then he lost his temper, as only a soft-voiced man can. "You made an immoral proposition that cannot be countenanced." "It takes two, you know." I thought it fair to remind him. "She was confused by you. You used your power over her. It wasn't her, it was you. She loved me." As soon as I had said this, I felt he would kill me if he could. "She did not love you." "Is that what she said?" "She told me so herself." I leaned on the wall, 2 palms flat, breathing out. There are different kinds of treachery, but betrayal is betrayal wherever you find it. No, he wouldn't kill me. Soft-voiced men do not kill. They are clever. Their kind of violence leaves no visible marks. He led me to the door, and I stumbled towards the ice cream van. "Here she is." I heard a shout, and saw that all the people huddled round Elsie's were forming a queue outside my window. The first one took out her purse. "2 wafers, love." "Did you know her in there?" "I knew her by sight." Then she turned to her friend. "We knew her by sight, didn't we?" I passed them the wafers. The women who came next were all together and gossiping. She felt no pain. She just slipped over in the night. 2 raspberries and 1 vanilla, please, love. Betty hasn't made her mind up yet. Yet it were the best way. She were old, you know. She couldn't look after herself any more. Do you want anything else? I asked them. Yes, Betty raised her voice. A 99 for me. I'm not paying. And then she burst out laughing. Get a move on, ordered the woman who was paying. I've got me kids at home. At last they'd all gone. But just as I dumped my sticky scoops into the cloudy cleaning jar, I saw Mrs. White crossing the road towards me. She was sniffing into a handkerchief. Making money out of the dead, she whimpered through the window. The pastor can't believe it. It's not holy, is it? I said to her. No, it's not. But you'll pay the price, and it'll be more than a cornet. I expect so, I said, hoping she'd go away. But she just leaned on the window shelf, sobbing so much that I had to wipe her up with a dishcloth. When's the funeral? I asked by way of conversation. You can't come. It's for the holy. I don't want to come. Oh, go away. I went to the wheel, and Mrs. White muttered something at me, then ran back across the road. So I went on as usual, not thinking at all. Past Woodnock Baptist Church, then up the long hill to Fern 4, where the ice cream works was. I need a couple of days off, I told them. It won't happen again. They weren't pleased. School holidays were a busy time, but I worked hard and made good money, so they let me go. In town, the following morning, I saw Joe. He waved and hurried up to me. We got one of yours in the parlour. Go over and have a look. I knew he meant Elsie. This was my last chance. None of the church remembered that I helped out at Elysium Fields. In the meantime, I had a letter to write. So I waited until evening before walking across town. Besides, there was a prayer meeting at church that night, so I'd be unlikely to meet anyone. Oh, it's you, is it? The woman looked up as I arrived. Is Joe there? Yes, it's me, and no, Joe isn't. He'll be at the allotment, won't he? Oh, yes. Digging up veg for the funeral supper. I forgot. The woman was weaving fern and hyacinth into a cross. Look what I'm doing for them, another bloody cross. She slapped it down in a temper. Let's have a drink of tea. I passed by Elsie's coffin on my way to the little kitchen, but I didn't look in. I wanted to wait until they had gone home. It felt peaceful, though. Fetch them bourbons, the woman yelled. We sat in the sun for half an hour or so, enjoying the warm and the tea. Best thing to come out of France, the woman declared, biting her bourbon. What about quiche? I reminded her. Right, that's right, she nodded. They do know about food, don't they? And she started to tell me some recipes she'd seen in a book in the library, and the time she'd sailed across the channel to Dieppe. Just then Joe drove up, and the woman went to make a fresh pot of tea. He opened the back of the vehicle. I got potatoes, and beets, and tomatoes, and lettuces, and some of them pea pods. That should do it. They're having turkey roll with vanilla ice cream afterwards. When is it? Tomorrow at 12 o'clock. We'd best sweep out that vehicle first, though. There's enough soil where she's going, isn't there? The woman came out with her tea. She was upset because Joe had promised to take her to the pictures that night to see Gary Cooper. Now he was talking about washing the vehicle. She spilled his tea into the saucer and hid the packet of bourbons under the fern. I didn't want her to be miserable, so I offered to clean out the vehicle and give it a polish. Can you put it in the garage? Asked Joe, doubtful. Course she can, snapped the woman. She drives that bloody ice cream van enough. Joe nodded and looked at his watch. All right, then. Let's get you home for a wash. The woman got up to fetch her helmet. Joe didn't wear one. Then they got onto the little scooter and weaved down the lane. I waited a while, then slowly found the bucket and leather and cleaned the vehicle. I wanted Elsie to have the best. It was dark by the time I eased it into the garage. I washed my hands and went into the parlour. Just a few lights were burning, enough to see Elsie. She was laid out in her Sunday best, with her hymn book next to her. The hymn book was full of Elsie's markings, telling her what key to play in. I wondered what they'd done with her accordion. There was a stool made for looking into the coffin, the right height so that you didn't have to stand. Joe was always sensitive about these things. He'd let you stay the night if you wanted to, though it wasn't common practice. I talked to Elsie for a long time, about the way I felt, and the letter I'd written. It was dawn before I went home. Downstairs the telephone was ringing. I wanted to stay asleep, but the telephone went on ringing. It was Joe. He was in a panic. Would I come and do a meal, cook it and serve it? He had to drive the vehicle and see to the coffin. The woman had fallen off the scooter on the way home from the Gary Cooper film. She hadn't broken anything, but she needed to stay in bed for a few days. She'd just managed to finish the wreath. I tried to tell Joe what would happen if I showed up at the funeral. "It's all right," he said. "I'll not miss their custom. They can go to Gloomy House next time." Alf ran a very different kind of establishment, with set burials at set prices. "Like a bloody Chinese takeaway," Joe scoffed. So I agreed, took some clothes to change into, and went off to cook turkey roll for 20. I kept out of sight until the cortege had set off, then rushed to lay the table. I reckoned I could set out the prawn cocktail and leave them to help themselves to veg, once they'd got a plate of turkey each. 45 minutes later they were back, so I ran out with the red-hot terrines of steaming veg and fixed them all the way along the table. Now Joe could hand out the plates, and we might get away with it. It went well, until the ice cream. The portions were standing by on the tray. Joe had promised to carry them through, then get everyone to leave the table for coffee and cake in the parlour, so that I could clear up. Suddenly, the vicar from the cemetery stood up and motioned Joe to come to the door. Joe looked panic-stricken and then came over to me, where I was peeping behind the kitchen window. "You'll have to do the ice cream. He wants to talk to me." "But Joe," I was terrified, and he had already gone. I picked up the first tray and tried to make my face look different. "Vanilla?" I asked Mrs. White, plonking it down in front of her. "Vanilla pasta?" I asked, spilling some of it. "Vanilla May?" "Vanilla Alice." And I vanillaed my way down the line until I came to my mother. She was staring at me with her mouth a little bit open. "You," and her pearls quivered against her throat. "Me, Vanilla." Elsie's relatives from Morecambe thought we'd gone mad. The pastor stood up. "Where's Mr. Ramsbottom? Is this a sick joke?" "The woman is ill," I explained. "I'm helping out." "Have you no shame?" "Not really." The pastor motioned to the flock. "We won't stay here to be mocked any longer." "Oh, she's a demon, your daughter," wailed Mrs. White, holding on to the pastor's arm. "She's no daughter of mine," snapped back my mother, head high, leading the way out. And they left. And so the relatives from Morecambe had seconds, and 2 pieces of Battenberg. When Joe came back, he just shook his head, said they were all mad, and that I was well out of it. He was right. But I was lonely. As I washed up in the kitchen thinking it over, I felt someone standing behind me. It was Miss Dewsbury. "You weren't at the meal?" was all that I could think of to say. No, I didn't want that. I wanted to see Elsie off, that's all. I know her cousin from Morecambe. I didn't reply, and she looked awkward. "How are you then?" "Oh, fine," I told her. "I can make some money, and I have a plan for next year." She was the first person I'd confided in, apart from Elsie. She seemed pleased. Told me it was a good idea, that she should have done it herself. "Things get in the way," she said. "That's what's sad about life." Then suddenly, "Will you come and see me in my flat?" "No," I answered slowly. "I can't do that." She gathered her bag and her gloves. "Well, if you change your mind, or if you need some money, I'm in the directory." She turned away and I heard her heels for a long time. I don't know why I didn't thank her, or even say goodbye. That was the last time I worked for the Elysium Fields on a regular basis. I had finished school and been offered a full-time job in a mental hospital. It wasn't something I would have chosen normally, but it had a distinct advantage over other jobs because I could live in a room of my own at least. "She'll not like it, will she?" the woman said to Joe. "How can she?" Joe replied. "All them lunatics." But I went nevertheless, comforting myself with my plan. The wind blew, and my shoes got darker and damp as I slithered past the town hall. Christmas pine radiant, crib courtesy of the Salvation Army. It had begun to snow again as I reached the bottom of our long, stretchy street. 10 blocks, 20 street lamps, I counted automatically. Soon be there. I wished I'd bought my gloves. The last few flags, and suddenly I'm outside my front door again. The parlour was a leaded window, so no one could see inside properly. I can see shapes, though, and I can hear what sounds like "Hark the Herald Angels Sing." It sounds like it, but in the background there is the distinct rhythm of samba. I hover. Then, mustering all my hormones, push open the front door. The lobby is lit. The reindeer shoehorn still hangs by the barometer, though the wallpaper no longer does. I will go into the parlour and hope for the best. In the parlour, I find my mother sitting in front of what is best described as a contraption. More interestingly, she is playing it. "Hello, Mum, it's me." I put down my bag and waited. She swivelled round on her stool, waving a piece of sheet music. The cover said "Glad Tidings." "Come and look at this. It's specially for the electronic organ." And she spun back again, rippling the keys. "What have you done with the piano?" "Oh, I've gone all electronic now. I like to keep up with the world." I went over to inspect the contraption. It was enormous, with a great flourish of music stand on the top. There were 2 keyboards, and a row of different coloured knobs and buttons, with things like spinet and xylophone printed on them. "Listen to this spinet," my mother commanded, and tinkled out the first verse of "In the Bleak Midwinter." "It's very atmospheric," I had to admit. "Oh, it's more than that. I'll show you." And for the next half hour she demonstrated the contraption. We 3 kings, with or without flugelhorn and bass ensemble. We could play pop too. Guitar, an up-tempo beat. "For the youth meetings," she explained. "We're going to get a band going, just like the Joy Strings." She switched it off, then stood back so that we could both admire it. "The stool comes with it." She pointed at the sculpture of plush and melamine. "And you get a bound copy of your favourite music book. Course, I had the Redemption hymnal done. See?" They had bound it in carvette, with gold leaf lettering, and my mother's initials on the spine. I nodded, and asked if we could have a cup of tea. "Did you get it from the Society for the Lost?" I asked her, thinking she might even have designed the accessories. For a moment she didn't answer. Then I saw she was blushing. She told me that the society had been disbanded, that there had been corruption at the Morecambe guest house, and that the Reverend Bone was a broken man. It appeared that most of the money put aside for the fishermen's missions had gone to pay the secretary's gambling debts. The profits from my mother's memberships and sales of religious accoutrements had gone to pay his wife's maintenance. His estranged wife. The woman he lived with was his girlfriend. "Pompadour," spat my mother. "Living in sin with his pompadour." When it was discovered that the society was on the verge of bankruptcy, my mother composed a letter to her vast battery of members, asking for funds and warning them that the society would not be present for much longer. The response had been overwhelming. Postal orders began to arrive by the next delivery, accompanied by notes of thanks for all the happiness through the years. "I carry my wipe-clean copy of the Revelations everywhere," wrote one woman. Finally, my mother sold off all the remaining copies of the Jim Reeves devotional selection at half price. They cleared their debts, with enough money left over for Reverend Bone to take a short holiday in Colwyn Bay. At the Morecambe guest house, reports of watered-down soup and unchanged towels caused an investigation by the health authorities. The place had slipped into disrepair and was ordered to clean up or close down. This was bad enough, but my mother had discovered an advert from them in the Psychic Weekly, offering those recently bereaved the services of Morecambe's most famous medium. The guest house had started holding séances every Friday in the billiard room. You had to pay extra and miss your evening meal because the medium didn't like to work with full stomachs. My mother was so upset that she submitted a long piece on devilry to the Band of Hope Review. She gave it to me to read for bedtime. "Have you got enough to keep you occupied?" I asked her anxiously. "I told you I'd gone electronic." "Well, it doesn't stop in the parlour." She was mysterious and wouldn't tell me any more. We spoke for a while of what I was doing and why. No detail, just enough to make both of us feel like we were making an effort. "Your cousin's in the police force now," she said brightly. "That's nice." "Yes, she's got a young man." She's deliberately not looking at me. "That's nice." "She asks after you." "Well, just tell her I'm not dead, then she won't waste money on a wreath." I decided it was time I went to bed. "Don't forget this," chirped my mother, tossing her article after me. My mother woke me with a cup of hot chocolate and a shopping list. I was to go downtown for her. She had to write to Pastor Spratt. The snow had worsened, so that my first stop had to be the Army and Navy for a pair of Wellingtons. Feeling stouter, I decided to visit Mrs. Arkwright at her vermin shop. The bell tinkled and she raised an eye from the powder she was bagging. It took her almost 5 minutes to recognise me. Then she leaned over the counter and banged me on the shoulder. "Hello," I said, brushing off the flea powder. "How are you?" "Sick and fed up." She started to put on her coat. "You're old enough for a drink in the Cock and Whistle now, aren't you?" I nodded, and she put a sign on the door and escorted me into the pub. My mother had always told me that the Cock and Whistle was a den of thieves and tax collectors. Now that I saw it for the first time, it wasn't nearly so exciting. It had a lino floor and a few withered-up old men at the bar. Mrs. Arkwright marched me into the snug and ordered 2 halves of mild. "Well," she said, "thought you'd buggered off for good." "I'm just here for Christmas." She sniffed. "Well, more fool you. There's a bloody dust hole in this place, dead." "Is business bad?" "Bloody awful. It's that newfangled central heating. You can't have it fitted without a damp course, and it clears all the bugs at the same time. I've complained, and I've tried to get compensation, but they say it's progress, and I should concentrate on pet care." "Can't you do that?" Mrs. Arkwright banged the table. "No, I bloody can't. They all want to act posh round here now. Don't want to be seen in a vermin shop. Besides, You know I can't stand them poodles. I'm not running a flaming poodle parlour. I asked her when all this had started and why. Bathrooms, she said darkly. Bathrooms did it. It appeared that the council had finally got round to recognising that the houses at the factory bottoms were less than desirable. They had made available large sums of money for basic improvements. Every back-to-back terrace had been granted a bathroom. After bathrooms, they want central heating and poodles, Mrs. Arkwright thundered on. We all know what central heating does to you. Dries up your natural juices, don't it? She felt very bitter. After the way she had protected the community for so many years. She had invested in all the latest pesticides, given advice at all hours, and worked hard at keeping up to date with foreign imports. There's not a bug anywhere I can't recognise, she told me proudly. What are you going to do? She glanced at me, then glanced around, then put her finger to her lips. I had to promise not to breathe a word. She had some savings, and she'd saved all her winnings on the bingo. She was going to emigrate. I was fascinated. She'd never been further than Blackpool in her life. Where are you going? Torremolinos. What? Yes, I've got the booklets, and I found one of them villas. I'm going to sell soft toys to the tourists. They'll be glad to buy from someone that speaks English. I thought about the cost of buying a villa, the flight, the stock, the money to live on while she found her feet. She was burbling on about how she'd been learning Spanish for 6 months out of a book and at night class in Rishton twice a week. Have you got enough money? I had to ask. Not quite. That's why I have to burn down my shop. She watched me closely, then reminded me I'd promised not to say a word. If you give me your address, I'll send you a copy of the write-up in the paper. She had it all worked out. Slow-burning fuse, lots of inflammables. She'd set it for her night class so that she'd be well out of the way. She didn't want her furniture anyway, and she could buy new clothes. She'd put her documents and valuables in a bank deposit. Still, she wasn't doing anything till after Christmas. I don't want to drag firemen away from their families. We drank up, and I left her as I'd found her, bagging flea powder. I didn't go straight home. I went up onto the hill. No one else was there with the weather like this. If I still lived there, I'd be indoors too. It's a visitor's privilege to be foolish. Right to the top I climbed, where I could watch the circling snow fill up the town till it blotted it out. All the black blotted out. I could have made a very impressive sermon. My sins like a cloud hung over me. He blotted them out when he set me free. That sort of thing. But where was God now? With heaven full of astronauts and the Lord overthrown? I miss God. I miss the company of someone utterly loyal. I still don't think of God as my betrayer. The servants of God, yes, but servants by their very nature betray. I miss God, who was my friend. I don't even know if God exists, but I do know that if God is your emotional role model, very few relationships will match up to it. I have an idea that one day it might be possible. I thought once it had become possible, and that glimpse had set me wondering, trying to find the balance between earth and sky. If the servants hadn't rushed in and parted us, I might have been disappointed, might have snatched off the white samite to find a bowl of soup. As it is, I can't settle. I want someone who is fierce and will love me until death, and know that love is as strong as death, and be on my side for ever and ever. I would cross seas and suffer sunstroke and give away all I have, but not for a man, because they want to be the destroyer and never the destroyed. That is why they're unfit for romantic love. There are exceptions, and I hope they are happy. Standing on the side of the hill, just where it slopes into the quarry, it's possible to see where Melanie used to live. I met her by accident, during the second year that I'd been away from home. She was pushing a pram. If she had been serene to the point of bovine before, she was now almost vegetable. I kept looking at her, and wondering how we ever had a relationship. Yet when she first left me, I thought I had blood poisoning. I couldn't forget her. Now she seemed to have forgotten everything. It made me want to shake her, to pull off all my clothes in the middle of the street and yell, "Remember this body?" She asked me what I was doing, and I longed to say I was sacrificing infants on top of Pendle Hill, or dabbling in the white slave trade. Anything to make her angry. Still, in her terms, she was happy. They had stopped eating meat, and she was pregnant again, and so on. She had even started writing to my mother. They had worked together on the town's first mission for coloured people. My mother had emptied her war cupboard of tinned pineapple because she thought that's what they ate. She had also gone round collecting blankets so that they wouldn't be cold. When the first coloured pastor came to her house, she had tried to explain to him the significance of parsley sauce. Later she found he had lived most of his life in Hull. Melanie, still waiting for her missionary posting, had dealt with all this as best she could, but she was out of her depth. And so, for the length of the mission, everyone had to eat gammon with pineapple, pineapple upside down cake, chicken in pineapple sauce, pineapple chunks, pineapple slice. After all, said my mother philosophically, oranges are not the only fruit. It was getting dark as I came down the hill, swirls of snow sticking to my face. I thought about the dog and was suddenly very sad. Sad for her death, for my death, for all the inevitable dying that comes with change. There's no choice that doesn't mean a loss. But the dog was buried in the clean earth, and the things I had buried were exhuming themselves. Clammy fears and dangerous thoughts, and the shadows I had put away for a more convenient time. I could not put them away forever. There is always a day of reckoning, but not all dark places need light. I have to remember that. When I got in, my mother was wearing a pair of headphones and jotting something down on a piece of paper. In front of her was a large radio set. I tapped her on the shoulder. "You could have given me a heart attack," she snapped, switching knobs up and down. "I can't talk now, I'm receiving." "Receiving what?" "My reports." And she jammed on her headphones and started scribbling again. It was well over half an hour before I could get any sense out of her. We sat together with a bowl of Vesta beef risotto, and I learned how she had gone electronic. Her radiogram had suddenly blown a crystal, which meant no world service. She had rushed to the shops with her bank book to find an alternative, and seen an advert for a build-it-yourself CB radio. She bought it, and the cheapest pocket transistor to keep her going. It was an extravagance. But the society had just collapsed, and she needed something to take her mind off it. She said it was very difficult, but she'd done it just the same, and now she regularly spoke to Christians all over England, as well as listening to the radio. Already there were plans of a meeting and a newsletter for electronic believers. "It's the Lord's will," she said, "so don't pester me while I'm doing it." When I woke the next day, the sun was just forcing itself through the snow clouds against the dusty window. The house felt quiet. Usually my mother played tapes, and I could hear her singing along or working out a new harmony. She had started to travel with Pastor Finch and his demon bus whenever he came into the area. She felt that she'd had a lot of experience and would be a help to other distressed parents with demon-possessed children. She'd begun a self-help kit for the spiritually disturbed. What not to do, who to contact, which passages of the Bible to read, and of course the choir liked to make tapes, to sing the demon away. Most were Pastor Finch's own compositions. I was glad she had a hobby, but not pleased that my particular sins were listed in the self-help kit. Still, at least she hadn't stuck in a passport photograph warning the North West to lock up their daughters. I stayed with them till just after Christmas, forced to watch endless programmes on the Nativity and to eat mince pies with Mrs. White, who was so nervous she started to hiccup uncontrollably. "Jack, get the smelling salts," ordered my mother, seizing Mrs. White's nose till she went blue. The smelling salts didn't work, and Mrs. White had to be taken to the bus stop on my father's arm. "It's all your fault," grumbled my mother, "and on Christmas Eve too." Then she went back into the living room to take a sip of port and peek at the Christmas presents. She couldn't bear not to open her presents, and it was still only 11 o'clock. We decided to play Beetle to pass the time. "You've cheated," exclaimed my mother as I fitted the last red leg on my insect. "Never trust a sinner." "All right, we'll play again." And we did. Right up until 5 minutes to 12, when my mother leapt up and switched on the radio to hear Big Ben. "Get your glass," she cried, filling it up with lemonade and a smattering of port. "Merry Christmas, praise the Lord. Now what have I got?" And she made a dive for her pile under the tree. "Look, you pulled the angel down," I complained. She stuffed it back upside down, one hand still tearing off the paper. "This is from Pastor Spratt," she said eagerly. I nodded, wondering what on earth could be that shape and get through customs. "Oh, look!" she cried. It was an elephant's foot with a hinged top. She hesitated a moment, then flung back the lid. It was an elephant's foot promise box. 2 layers of little scrolls, all rolled up, each with a promise from the Word. My mother had tears in her eyes as she put it carefully on top of the sideboard. "What's this from Auntie Maud?" I asked, picking out a hard, long object. "Oh, it'll probably be a sword stick. You know what she's like." My mother tapped her head. "It's this I'm interested in, from your father." It was flat and not very well wrapped. Slowly she unravelled it. And there it was, a catapult. I couldn't believe it. "Why's Dad bought you a catapult?" "I asked him to. It's to get rid of them cats next door." And she told me how she tried everything, from scraps to menaces, but still they peed on her prize roses. She was going to ping at them now with dried peas. I shook my head, not knowing how to say that I'd only bought her a cardigan. I didn't see much of them for the next couple of days. They were at church. And it was in the first post after Christmas that my mother received the dreadful news. It was about the Morecambe guest house again, or rather its owner, Mrs. Butler. "Definitely a job for Pastor Finch," said my mother, putting on her coat to go to the phone box. As soon as she had gone, I picked up the letter. It seemed that Mrs. Butler, depressed by the falling numbers at the guest house and frustrated by the constant nagging of the health authority, had taken to drink. More importantly, she had got herself a job as a matron of the local old folks' home. While there, she had taken up with a strange, charismatic man who had once been the official exorcist to the Bishop of Bermuda. He had been dismissed under mysterious circumstances for some kind of unmentionable offence with the curate's wife. Back in England, and safe within the besotted arms of Mrs. Butler, he had persuaded her to let him practice voodoo on some of the more senile patients. They had been caught at it by a night nurse. Imagine my mother's feelings. The Society for the Lost had been a bitter blow. The Morecambe guest house a terrible shock. But this was the final straw. I stared into the fire, waiting for her to come home. Families, real ones, are chairs and tables and the right number of cups. But I had no means of joining one, and no means of dismissing my own. She had tied a thread around my button, to tug when she pleased. I knew a woman in another place. Perhaps she would save me. But what if she were asleep? What if she sleepwalked beside me and I never knew? Then the back door slammed and my mother marched in on a gust of wind. "What a mess!" she raged. "If I'm not sharp, I'm going to miss my broadcast. Fetch the headphones." I passed them over to her and she adjusted the microphone. "This is Kindly Light, calling Manchester. Come in, Manchester. This is Kindly Light,